I am Riley, 33 years old, and I spent my entire life being treated like the dirt on my family's shoes. When my mother called to ban me from my own father's 60th birthday dinner, she said my garbage collector job would humiliate my brother's elite new fiancé. I did not scream or cry. I simply looked up at the digital monitor displaying my company's $85 million quarterly revenue and said, I understand. 3 weeks later, my family showed up at a high society gala, totally unaware that the woman they were trying to impress was about to destroy their lives on my behalf. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to prove your toxic family wrong. The roar of the massive hydraulic baler echoed off the corrugated steel walls of the recycling facility. I stood on the metal catwalk overlooking the bustling sorting floor of Vertex Waste Solutions. My hands were stained with dark, thick grease from personally inspecting a jammed conveyor belt on the main sorting line. I wiped my hands aggressively on a rough shop rag, feeling the familiar industrial grit under my fingernails. This was my domain, a kingdom built entirely on the discarded items other people threw away. I loved the loud noise, the mechanical rhythm, and the tangible reality of turning raw waste into sustainable resources. Suddenly, my phone vibrated intensely in the pocket of my neon yellow safety vest. I pulled the phone out and checked the bright screen. It was my mother, Brenda. We had not spoken a single word since Thanksgiving when she forced me to sit at a small folding table in the kitchen because she feared my work boots might scuff her pristine hardwood floors. I answered the call over the deafening hum of the heavy machinery below me. There was no polite greeting, no asking how my day was going or if I was healthy. Her voice was sharp, frantic, and cutting straight to the point like a surgical blade. Riley, do not come to your father's 60th birthday dinner next Friday. I stepped into my glass-enclosed office overlooking the plant floor to block out the overwhelming industrial noise. I asked her why she was uninviting me with only a week's notice. My mother sighed heavily, the sound practically vibrating with pure condescension through the phone speaker. Your brother Connor is bringing his new fiancée Jasmine to meet the family for the very first time, she explained impatiently. She comes from a prominent, highly educated African-American family in Chicago. They are incredibly wealthy real estate tycoons. Connor has finally secured his future with a woman of high status, and we need everything to be absolutely flawless for this introduction. I stared down at the dark smudges of grease still clinging to my knuckles. And my presence would ruin that flawless image, I asked, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotion. Do not play dumb with me, my mother snapped fiercely. You drive a garbage truck. You spend your days wading through rotting trash and industrial waste. Jasmine is a brilliant corporate lawyer who wears custom designer suits and attends charity galas. Connor told her family that his sister is a low-level sanitation worker, which is already embarrassing enough for him. If she sees you showing up to a fine dining restaurant in your cheap clothes smelling like a city landfill, it will humiliate your brother beyond repair. We simply cannot risk her powerful family thinking we are low-class people. I need you to stay far away from that restaurant and do not try to contact Connor. The sheer cruelty of her words hung heavily in the air between us. She was prioritizing a woman she had never even met over her own flesh and blood. She was willing to erase her daughter from a major family milestone just to maintain a fragile illusion of superiority. Connor was exactly the kind of man who would lie about his roots to impress a wealthy woman. He was a mid-level investment banker, drowning in debt, desperately using our parents' retirement savings to fund a fake luxurious lifestyle. But my mother happily enabled his delusions while treating my honest hard work as a shameful secret that needed to be swept under the rug. I looked away from my dirty hands and shifted my gaze upward. Mounted on the sleek wall of my modern office was a massive digital monitor. The bright screen displayed the live quarterly financial metrics for Vertex Waste Solutions. The revenue counter for the fourth quarter had just crossed the $85 million mark. I did not drive a single garbage truck. I owned a massive fleet of 400 of them. I was the chief executive officer and sole founder of the largest eco-friendly waste management and recycling corporation in the entire state. I had built a $300 million corporate empire from absolute scratch through late nights' intense grit and relentless determination. Meanwhile, my parents poured every dime of their life savings into Connor's supposedly prestigious banking career, completely ignorant to the fact that he was financially drowning and living a lie. But my mother did not know any of that. To her, a woman wearing a high-visibility vest was nothing more than an uneducated peasant. I took a slow, deep breath, refusing to give her the satisfaction of hearing my voice break. I would not shed a single tear over people who judged my worth by a job title they completely misunderstood. "I understand," I said calmly. "I hope Dad has a wonderful birthday dinner." I ended the call without waiting for her reply. I tossed the greasy rag into the trash bin and walked back out onto the metal catwalk. Let them have their fancy dinner. Let Connor pretend to be a wealthy investment banker for his elite lawyer fiancé. I had a massive corporation to run and real work to accomplish. But just as I was slipping my phone back into my pocket, my plant manager rushed up the metal stairs 2 steps at a time. He was clutching a thick manila folder and looking completely breathless. What he handed me next would set the stage for the greatest collision my arrogant family had ever faced. Tom, my senior plant manager, stopped at the top of the metal stairs, his chest heaving as he tried to catch his breath over the industrial roar of the facility. He pushed his safety glasses up into his hair and shoved a thick, heavy manila folder directly into my chest. He did not even bother with a greeting. He just pointed a grease-stained finger at the bold logo embossed on the front cover, Vanguard Holdings. I instantly recognized the name. Every business owner in the state knew Vanguard Holdings. They were a colossal real estate conglomerate famous for buying up entire city blocks and transforming them into luxury, ultra-modern eco-developments. Securing a contract with Vanguard was the ultimate golden ticket. It was the kind of deal that elevated a regional company into a national powerhouse overnight. "They want us!" Tom yelled over the noise of the hydraulic crushers. "They are launching a $2 billion mega project downtown. Luxury high-rises, commercial retail spaces, and a massive green energy park. They are looking for an exclusive long-term waste management partner. They need a zero landfill guarantee, complete recycling integration, and a fleet capable of handling thousands of tons of daily waste without disrupting the high-end aesthetic of their neighborhoods." I opened the folder, my eyes rapidly scanning the executive summary. The numbers were staggering. If Vertex Waste Solutions landed this exclusive contract, our annual revenue would instantly double. We would dominate the entire commercial sector. "But they are notoriously ruthless," Tom continued, his voice tight with anxiety. "They have already rejected 3 other major sanitation companies this week alone. Vanguard does not play games, Riley. They dig deep into the operational grit of every potential partner. They sent over their demands for the initial audit, and it is intense. The lead legal counsel spearheading this entire mega project is terrifyingly meticulous. She is the one making the final decision on whether we get the contract or get thrown out." I flipped to the second page of the dossier where the Vanguard executive team profiles were listed. My eyes locked onto the photograph of their lead legal counsel. The woman in the corporate headshot radiated absolute authority. She wore a sharp, custom-tailored charcoal suit. Her posture was flawless, and her dark, piercing eyes looked like they could see straight through a balance sheet and expose every hidden lie. The brief detailed her background. She graduated top of her class from an Ivy League law school. She came from a prominent, highly educated African-American family in Chicago, a dynasty of real estate moguls known for their fierce work ethic and uncompromising standards of transparency. Her name was printed in bold black ink right below her photograph: Jasmine. A sharp electric shock ran down my spine. I stared at the name, then at the face, and then back at the name. This was not a coincidence. This was the exact woman my mother had just spent 10 minutes raving about on the phone. This was the elite high society lawyer my brother Connor was engaged to. This was the woman for whom I was banned from attending my own father's birthday dinner, all because my family believed my connection to the garbage industry would humiliate her. A slow, dark smile spread across my face. The irony was so thick I could practically taste it. My parents were desperately mortgaging their retirement and destroying their own family to impress a woman who was actively seeking out a partnership with the exact industry they despised. They thought Jasmine was a delicate, superficial socialite who would faint at the sight of a garbage truck. They had no idea she was a corporate predator who scrutinized industrial waste contracts for breakfast. "What does she want for the audit?" I asked, tapping my finger against Jasmine's photograph. Tom wiped sweat from his forehead. "She explicitly stated that she refuses to sit in a glass boardroom and watch a polished PowerPoint presentation. She thinks corporate slideshows are just smoke and mirrors used to hide operational flaws. She demands a boots-on-the-ground inspection of our fleet. She wants to see our trucks running their actual morning routes. She wants to see how our sanitation workers handle the physical trash, how clean we keep the upscale neighborhoods, and how efficiently we process the waste on the street level. She is sending her team to audit the Platinum route tomorrow morning at exactly 8 o'clock. The Platinum route was our most exclusive commercial service path. It covered the wealthiest, most pristine districts in the city. It serviced the high-end boutique stores, the luxury condominiums, and the overpriced outdoor cafes. It also happened to cover the exact upscale neighborhood where my brother Connor rented a tiny, severely overpriced studio apartment just to maintain his fake facade of wealth. I knew for a fact that Connor and Jasmine frequently had their Sunday morning brunch at an open-air cafe right on that route, ensuring they were seen by the right social circles. Tom looked at me nervously. "I can have the vice president of operations handle the street tour. We will put him in a clean suit, get the newest truck in the fleet, and make sure everything looks pristine for her. We cannot afford to mess this up, Riley. This woman will tear us apart if she sees even one operational flaw." I closed the heavy manila folder with a sharp snap. "No," I said, my voice ringing with absolute certainty. "The vice president of operations will stay in the office tomorrow. Jasmine wants to see the grit, so we are going to show her the grit. She wants to see how the real work gets done, and I respect a woman who demands the truth over a corporate illusion." Tom blinked, clearly caught off guard. "Then who is going to lead the street inspection?" I looked down at my grease-stained hands and then at my neon yellow high-visibility vest. I thought about my mother's cruel voice on the phone, telling me I was a filthy peasant who needed to hide in the shadows so my brother could play pretend. I thought about Connor drowning in massive credit card debt, desperately lying to a brilliant woman who made a living destroying liars. My two completely separate worlds were on a direct high-speed collision course, and I was not about to hit the brakes. In fact, I was going to press my foot down hard on the accelerator. "I am going to lead the inspection," I told Tom, turning to walk toward the dispatch office. "I will drive the lead truck on the Platinum route myself tomorrow morning. Have the crew prep the commercial baler, and make sure my high-visibility vest is washed. We have a billionaire lawyer to impress, and I want to give my future sister-in-law a front-row seat to exactly how the trash gets taken out." I left Tom standing speechless on the catwalk and headed straight for my private office. I locked the heavy glass door behind me and dropped into my ergonomic leather chair. The adrenaline from the Vanguard dossier was still pulsing through my veins, but a darker, more analytical curiosity began to take over. How exactly did my brother manage to ensnare a woman like Jasmine? Connor was a walking disaster dressed in expensive suits he could not afford. He lacked the discipline, the intellect, and the actual capital to run in circles with Chicago real estate royalty. Jasmine was a predator in the courtroom, a woman whose entire career was built on sniffing out corporate deception. Yet somehow she was wearing his engagement ring. It did not make sense. Liars always leave a paper trail, and I had the corporate resources to follow it. I picked up my secure office phone and dialed my chief financial investigator, David. My company regularly vetted massive corporate clients to ensure they were solvent before we signed decade-long waste management contracts. That meant we had premium access to deep-dive financial software and asset tracking databases. I gave David my brother's full legal name, his supposed banking firm, and my parents' home address. I told him I needed a comprehensive asset and liability report on all three of them. I wanted it within the hour. 45 minutes later, a secure encrypted file landed in my inbox. I opened the digital document, my eyes scanning the heavily detailed financial footprint of my family. What I saw did not just make me angry, it made me feel physically sick. The report immediately proved that Connor was not a successful investment banker. His actual job title was listed as a mid-level analyst. He was essentially a glorified spreadsheet reader, making a fraction of the executive salary he claimed to earn. But the income discrepancy was the least of his problems. I scrolled down to his liabilities section. A glaring sea of red numbers painted a picture of absolute financial ruin. Connor was drowning in exactly $1.2 million of debt. The breakdown was catastrophic and pathetic. He had multiple maxed-out high-yield credit cards, predatory personal loans with terrifying interest rates, and a massive trail of offshore gambling losses. He was living a complete fantasy. He was buying designer clothes, leasing a luxury sports car, and throwing money around at elite country clubs to construct the perfect illusion of an old money bachelor. He was a financial corpse walking around in a tailored suit. The obvious question was how he kept this illusion funded for so long without declaring bankruptcy. I moved to the second file containing my parents' financial history. The answer stared back at me in cold, hard data. Brenda and Richard, the same people who told me they could not afford to lend me $500 for a broken water heater during my first year in business, had completely liquidated their retirement accounts. Even worse, they had quietly taken out a massive second mortgage on their suburban home just 6 months ago. They were funneling every single dollar of their remaining equity directly into Connor's checking account. They were literally betting their house on him. My parents were entirely complicit in this massive fraud. They were deliberately funding Connor's fake elite lifestyle to trick Jasmine into a marriage. It was a predatory, calculated con. They looked at Jasmine not as a brilliant future daughter-in-law, but as a wealthy mark. They were banking on the fact that once the marriage certificate was signed, her powerful family would quietly pay off Connor's catastrophic debt to avoid a public scandal. They were setting this successful woman up to be financially drained by a parasite. And they thought my garbage trucks were the most disgusting thing in the world. I closed the financial reports and securely erased the files from my desktop. The level of hypocrisy was almost artistic. My mother was willing to permanently ban me from my own father's birthday dinner to protect this vile scheme. She demanded I hide in the shadows because honest, dirty labor was humiliating to her sensibilities. She was about to learn that the only thing truly foul in this scenario was the stench of her own deception. I opened the routing software on my second monitor and pulled up the GPS logistics for the Platinum route. The software displayed the digital map of the upscale neighborhood where Connor rented his severely overpriced studio apartment. I cross-referenced his location with the commercial dumpsters we serviced in that zone. I easily located the chic outdoor cafe where my parents were treating Connor and Jasmine to an expensive Sunday brunch tomorrow morning. It was located right next to a commercial alleyway featuring 3 massive steel dumpsters belonging to our highest-paying retail clients. I dragged my mouse across the screen and manually reassigned the route schedule. I placed my specific heavy-duty commercial truck right at that exact cafe alleyway at exactly 10 in the morning. It was the absolute peak hour for the elite brunch crowd. I typed my own name into the driver assignment slot and locked the schedule into the main company dispatch system. There was no backing out now. The collision course was officially set. I turned off my office monitors, grabbed my keys, and looked out over the sparkling city skyline. My family thought they had successfully thrown me away. They thought they could erase my existence to protect a fragile house of cards built on lies and stolen equity. But they forgot one crucial detail about the daughter they discarded. I am the one who controls exactly when and where the trash gets collected. I walked out of the executive suite and headed home to get some rest. I set my alarm for 4 in the morning. Tomorrow I was going to ruin their perfect brunch. The morning air was crisp and biting as my massive 10-wheeler rolled into the ultra-rich neighborhood. The Platinum route was exactly as advertised. Pristine sidewalks, luxury boutiques with polished glass storefronts, and tree-lined streets that smelled of old money and expensive espresso. I backed the heavy garbage truck into the narrow cobblestone alleyway right behind Le Petit Jardin, the most exclusive outdoor cafe in the entire district. The loud rhythmic beeping of my truck's backup alarm cut through the serene, quiet atmosphere like a chainsaw announcing my arrival to the wealthy patrons enjoying their Sunday morning. I threw the heavy transmission into park and climbed down from the elevated cab. The solid thud of my steel-toed boots hitting the pavement sent a vibration of raw power up my legs. I pulled on my thick industrial gloves and adjusted my neon yellow high-visibility vest over my dark work shirt. The heavy fabric of the vest caught the bright morning sunlight, making me impossible to miss. I walked to the rear of the truck and grabbed the hydraulic control lever to prep the lifting mechanism for the massive commercial dumpsters lined up against the brick wall. Through the thin gaps in the manicured ivy hedge that separated the grimy alleyway from the chic cafe patio, I had a perfect, unobstructed view of the dining area. White linen tablecloths fluttered in the gentle breeze. Silver cutlery clinked against fine porcelain plates. And right in the center of the patio, holding court at the best table in the house, was my family. Connor sat with his back facing my direction. He wore a crisp pastel blue linen shirt and a heavy silver watch that I knew for a fact was maxing out his last active credit card. Across from him sat Jasmine. Even in weekend casual wear, she radiated absolute authority and quiet wealth. She was listening intently to something my father was saying, her posture impeccable. Brenda and Richard sat adjacent to them, leaning forward eagerly, performing the roles of cultured affluent parents with nauseating enthusiasm. I grabbed a metal clipboard from the side of the truck and pretended to check the maintenance tags on the steel bins. I let the massive diesel engine of my truck idle the low rumble, creating a steady, intimidating vibration under my feet. I watched them through the dark green leaves of the hedge. Brenda raised a crystal mimosa glass to her lips, throwing her head back to laugh at a joke Connor had just made. As she tilted her head, her gaze drifted past the patio umbrellas, past the wrought iron fence, and straight through the ivy. I saw the exact second her brain processed the neon yellow vest and the familiar face beneath the hard hat. The color drained from her face so fast she looked like she had seen a ghost. Her eyes widened to the size of saucers. She inhaled sharply and began choking violently on her expensive champagne. She coughed uncontrollably, slamming her crystal glass down onto the table so hard that the orange liquid splashed over the edges and stained the pristine white linen. Richard patted her back, his face twisting in sudden confusion. Jasmine leaned forward, asking if she was all right. But Brenda was not looking at them. She frantically reached under the table and grabbed Connor's arm, her perfectly manicured nails digging deep into his expensive sleeve. She pointed a trembling finger toward the alleyway, her breathing ragged and panicked. Connor turned his head, his eyes locked onto my neon vest and then directly onto my face. Even from 20 feet away, I could see the absolute terror wash over him. The fake, charming smile he had been directing at Jasmine vanished instantly. His entire carefully constructed reality was threatening to collapse right there over avocado toast. He quickly snapped his head back toward Jasmine, who was distracted by a waiter bringing over a fresh pot of coffee. Connor leaned in and whispered frantically to our parents. Richard went rigid, his face turning an angry, mottled shade of purple as he glared in my direction. Connor stood up from the table with forced smoothness. He offered Jasmine a practiced apologetic smile, touching her shoulder gently with a display of fake affection. He pointed toward the inside of the cafe building, clearly claiming he needed to use the restroom or take an urgent business call. Jasmine simply nodded, taking a sip of her coffee, completely unaware of the raging inferno of panic consuming the man she was about to marry. The second Connor turned his back to his brilliant, wealthy fiancée, the charming facade melted away completely. His face twisted into a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He walked briskly past the crowded patio tables, moving with a stiff, aggressive stride that practically radiated violence. He pushed past a waiter carrying a tray of delicate pastries, not even stopping to apologize as the man stumbled and nearly dropped the food. Connor rounded the corner of the brick building and stepped off the immaculate sidewalk, crossing the invisible boundary into the gritty reality of the commercial alleyway. The smell of diesel exhaust and damp cardboard immediately replaced the aroma of fresh coffee and expensive perfume. He marched straight toward my truck, his hands balled into tight fists at his sides. His expensive Italian leather loafers stepped right into a puddle of grimy condensation leaking from the bottom of the restaurant dumpster, but he was too furious to notice the filthy water soaking into his shoes. His jaw was clenched so tightly a muscle ticked violently near his ear. He thought he was about to intimidate a lowly garbage worker who had accidentally wandered too close to his delicate illusion. He was marching over to violently confront me, to threaten me, and to force me back into the shadows before the woman who held the key to his financial salvation noticed my existence. He stepped fully into the alley, safely out of Jasmine's immediate sightline, and closed the distance between us. He slammed his hand against the cold steel of my truck, trapping me in the narrow space between the massive hydraulic lifting arms and the grimy brick wall of the cafe. His face was mere inches from mine, and I could smell the expensive cologne he had undoubtedly purchased using our parents' drained retirement funds. Beneath the designer fragrance, he smelled of sheer, unadulterated panic. "What do you think you are doing here?" he hissed. His voice was a frantic, venomous whisper, desperately suppressed, to ensure the elite brunch crowd on the patio would not hear a single syllable. "Are you stalking me? Did Mom not make it perfectly clear that you are forbidden from coming anywhere near my life?" I did not blink. I stood my ground, letting the heavy idling engine of the 10-wheeler vibrate through my boots. I crossed my arms over my neon yellow safety vest, looking at him with absolute indifference. "I am doing my job, Connor. This is a commercial loading zone. You are standing in my workspace." His upper lip curled into an ugly sneer. He glanced nervously over his shoulder toward the edge of the brick building, terrified that his brilliant fiancée might wander around the corner. When he confirmed the coast was clear, he turned his wrath back to me. "Your job!" He spat, his eyes raking up and down my work clothes with profound disgust. "Your job is to stay out of sight. I am sitting 20 feet away with a woman whose family practically owns the Chicago skyline. Jasmine is legal royalty. She is perfection. And you decide to park your filthy, foul-smelling garbage mobile right next to our table. You look like a disgusting peasant. You are a humiliating stain on this family, Riley." The sheer audacity of his delusion was almost impressive. Here was a man drowning in over $1 million of gambling debt, a man who was actively draining his elderly parents dry, calling me a peasant simply because I wore a high-visibility vest. He was a financial parasite, yet he stood there lecturing me about class and status. I did not feel a single ounce of hurt or intimidation. I only felt a cold, calculating anticipation. "The trash needs to be collected," I said evenly, holding his desperate gaze. "And Vanguard Holdings expects pristine streets. I am just providing premium service." Connor did not register the mention of Vanguard. He was too consumed by his own terror. He reached into the front pocket of his tailored linen trousers. His fingers trembled slightly as he pulled out a sleek leather money clip. He yanked out a crisp, newly printed $100 bill. I knew exactly where that money came from. It was cash my mother had likely handed him that very morning to ensure he could pay for the brunch without his maxed-out credit cards declining in front of his wealthy bride-to-be. He lunged forward and aggressively shoved the $100 bill directly into the center of my chest. He pressed his knuckles hard against my collarbone, trying to physically force me to take the bribe. "Take this," he ordered, his voice dripping with desperation and malice. "Take this money, get back into your pathetic truck, and drive away right now. Skip this stop. Skip this entire neighborhood. If you say one single word to Jasmine, if you even look in her direction and expose who you are, I swear to God I will destroy you. Mom and Dad will make sure you are ruined. We will bury you." He held the bill against my chest, waiting for me to eagerly snatch the cash, like the desperate, impoverished sister he imagined me to be. He expected me to cower. He expected me to bow my head, take the handout, and slink back into the shadows where he believed I belonged. I looked down at his trembling hand. Then I looked up into his bloodshot, panicked eyes. I did not raise my voice. I did not physically fight back. I simply relaxed my posture and took a half step backward. I let the crisp $100 bill fall. We both watched the paper currency flutter through the heavy diesel-scented air. It drifted downward, twisting in the slight breeze, before landing perfectly flat in a dark, foul-smelling puddle of stagnant water leaking directly from the bottom of the restaurant dumpster. The dirty, grimy water instantly soaked into the edges of the bill, turning the crisp green paper into a soggy, ruined piece of trash. Connor gasped, his eyes widening in absolute shock. He stared at the ruined money floating in the garbage runoff, completely paralyzed by my utter defiance. His brain could not compute why a supposedly impoverished sanitation worker would throw away $100. "I do not need your stolen allowance, Connor," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous icy calm. "And you do not have the power to destroy anyone. You are just a scared little boy playing dress-up with other people's money." His face flushed a violent shade of crimson. He opened his mouth, drawing in a sharp breath to scream at me, ready to completely lose his mind and escalate the situation to physical violence. But the scream never came. Instead, all the blood instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a chalk-white corpse. His eyes darted past my shoulder, fixing on something entirely terrifying right behind me. I did not need to turn around to know what had happened. I could hear the rhythmic, confident click of expensive designer heels stepping off the pristine sidewalk and onto the rough, gritty asphalt of the alleyway. While Connor had been busy throwing his little tantrum and trying to bribe me with our parents' stolen equity, he had failed to monitor his surroundings. Jasmine was not a woman who sat idly by, waiting for a man to return. She was a hyper-observant corporate lawyer who noticed everything. She had realized her fiancé did not walk inside the cafe toward the restrooms. She had seen him storm around the side of the building toward the loud, idling garbage truck. I watched the absolute horror paralyze every muscle in Connor's body. I slowly turned my head, looking over my shoulder toward the entrance of the alley. Jasmine stood there, perfectly framed by the morning sunlight. Her arms were crossed over her tailored suit jacket. Her sharp, calculating dark eyes swept over the grimy scene. She looked at the ruined $100 bill floating in the puddle. She looked at Connor's panicked, sweaty face. And finally, she locked her piercing gaze directly onto me in my neon yellow vest. My brother's worst nightmare had just walked right into the alley, and the real audit was about to begin. "Is everything all right here, Connor?" Jasmine's voice cut through the thick air of the alleyway like a freshly sharpened blade. Her tone was smooth and cultured, but it carried the unmistakable, calculating edge of a courtroom interrogation. She did not raise her voice yet. Her presence instantly dominated the grimy space between the brick walls and the idling garbage truck. I watched a miraculous physical transformation take over my brother. The violent pulsing rage that had contorted his features just a second ago evaporated. He swallowed hard, his Adam's apple bobbing nervously against his crisp linen collar. He forced his jaw to relax, stretching his lips into a dazzling, practiced smile. He quickly stepped completely over the puddle of trash water, physically positioning his body to block Jasmine from getting any closer to me. "Darling, everything is perfectly fine," Connor said, his voice dripping with an artificial sugary sweetness that made my stomach turn. "I was just trying to do a good deed for the less fortunate." Jasmine stopped walking. She crossed her arms over her tailored suit jacket, her dark eyes locking onto Connor. "A good deed in a commercial loading zone?" she asked, raising a single perfectly sculpted eyebrow. Connor let out a soft, condescending chuckle, attempting to brush off her suspicion with a wave of his manicured hand. He pointed a thumb back at me, not even bothering to look in my direction. "Yes, well, it breaks my heart to see people struggling. This poor woman is clearly down on her luck. I saw her digging around the dumpsters, doing some sort of court-ordered community service, I imagine. I just wanted to give her $100 so she could buy a warm meal." I stepped a bit too close and must have startled her. The poor thing dropped the cash right into the puddle. It was a vile, magnificent lie. He delivered it with the polished ease of a seasoned con artist. He was painting himself as the benevolent, wealthy philanthropist, taking pity on a destitute vagrant. He was turning his aggressive, panic-stricken bribery attempt into a halo of charity to impress his billionaire fiancé. I did not scream. I did not yell that he was a liar or announce to the alleyway that I was his biological sister. I simply stood my ground, leaning my weight against the massive steel door of my truck, and watched him dig his own grave. I kept my face entirely devoid of emotion and maintained direct eye contact with Jasmine. Two women sizing each other up while a foolish man talked himself into a corner. Jasmine was a top-tier corporate lawyer. She dismantled liars for a living. She read body language, analyzed evidence, and spotted inconsistencies before breakfast. She looked down at the ruined $100 bill floating in the toxic puddle. Then her sharp gaze traveled up my body. She noted my heavy steel-toed work boots. She noted the pristine high-quality safety gear. She noted the expensive digital commercial clipboard resting easily in my grip. Homeless people doing community service did not drive $500,000 state-of-the-art sanitation trucks. Connor's lie was completely illogical, and I could see the exact moment Jasmine realized her fiancé was insulting her intelligence. Before Jasmine could dismantle his story, the frantic, rapid clicking of designer heels echoed off the pavement. Brenda came rushing around the corner of the cafe building. My mother looked absolutely unhinged. Her face was flushed, and she was breathing heavily, reeking of expensive perfume mixed with sheer terror. "Connor, Jasmine, what on earth are you doing back here among this filth?" Brenda gasped, her voice trembling. She immediately inserted herself between Jasmine and me. She threw her arms out wide, using her own body as a physical barricade to block Jasmine's line of sight. She grabbed Jasmine's elbow, pulling at the expensive fabric of her suit jacket, desperately trying to physically turn the younger woman back toward the restaurant. "We must go back to our mimosas right now," Brenda insisted, her pitch rising in panic. "These alleyways are unsafe. People like this can be highly unpredictable and dangerous. You simply cannot interact with this kind of element, Jasmine. It is a health hazard." Jasmine stopped moving. She did not let my mother push her away. She looked down at Brenda's hand clutching her elbow, and the temperature in the alley seemed to drop 10 degrees. "People like this," Jasmine asked, her voice dangerously quiet. She firmly shook off my mother's grip. Jasmine stepped cleanly around Brenda, forcing my mother to stumble slightly over the uneven pavement. Jasmine closed the distance, stopping just a few feet away from where I stood. She completely ignored Connor's nervous stammering and Brenda's frantic protests. She looked directly at me, really looked at me. Her dark, intelligent eyes scanned my heavy canvas work jacket, analyzing the details beneath the neon yellow safety vest. I stood tall, squaring my shoulders, allowing her full access to the truth. Her gaze locked onto the customized embroidery sitting proudly over my left breast pocket. The bright blue and green industrial threads caught the morning light, spelling out three very specific words: Vertex Waste Solutions. I saw the lightning strike behind Jasmine's eyes, the mechanical click of a brilliant mind putting the final pieces of a puzzle together. This was the billion-dollar Vanguard real estate contract. This was the massive ecological venture she was personally spearheading. This was the exact sanitation corporation she had demanded to audit on the street level tomorrow morning. She realized in a fraction of a second that she was not staring at a homeless vagrant. She was staring at a specialized employee of the corporate empire she was about to ruthlessly evaluate. Jasmine looked from the embroidered logo on my chest back up to my face. She saw my calm, unbothered posture. She saw the quiet authority radiating from my stance, a demeanor completely devoid of the submissive fear a cornered victim would display. I held her fierce gaze and gave her a very slow, deliberate nod. It was a silent acknowledgement, a quiet confirmation between two powerful women that a massive game of deception was being played. Jasmine's expression smoothed out into a mask of absolute professional neutrality. She turned her back on me and faced Connor. She smiled a tight, sharp smile that did not reach her eyes. "How incredibly generous of you, Connor," Jasmine said, her tone laced with a heavy, dangerous irony that went entirely over his head. "You are always so full of surprises. Let us go back to our table. I suddenly have a lot of corporate research to prepare for tomorrow morning." Connor let out a massive, shuddering breath of relief. He thought he had won. He thought his ridiculous lie had successfully neutralized the threat. He offered Jasmine his arm, casting one final venomous glare of triumph in my direction as he escorted her out of the alley. Brenda scurried after them, shooting me a look of pure, unadulterated hatred before disappearing around the brick wall. They walked back to their luxurious brunch, completely oblivious to the fact that they had just sealed their own doom. As Jasmine turned the corner, I watched her pull her sleek smartphone from her designer handbag. She was not looking at brunch menus or checking social media. Her thumbs flew across the screen, typing with fierce, determined speed. The trap had been recognized, and the predator was already plotting her next move. I climbed back into the cab of my 10-wheeler. The heavy steel door slammed shut, instantly severing me from the superficial, fragile world of the cafe patio. I engaged the hydraulics, lifted the remaining commercial bins, and completed the platinum route with absolute mechanical precision. My hands expertly maneuvered the massive steering wheel, but my mind was completely consumed by the intricate chess match that had just been set into motion. Connor thought he had escaped. He thought his pathetic, frantic lie had saved his miserable illusion. He had no idea he was already bleeding out. By early afternoon, I parked the rig at the main facility and walked straight into the towering glass and steel headquarters of Vertex Waste Solutions. I bypassed the main lobby and took the private executive elevator directly to the penthouse suite. The transition from the gritty, diesel-fumed reality of the street to the absolute pinnacle of corporate power always gave me a rush. I swiped my keycard and stepped into my massive sunlit office. The floor-to-ceiling windows offered a commanding panoramic view of the entire city skyline. I stripped off my heavy canvas work jacket. I peeled off the neon yellow high-visibility vest, the fabric still carrying the faint, unmistakable odor of commercial refuse and city exhaust, and tossed it carelessly onto a pristine white Italian leather couch sitting in the center of the room. The visual contrast was perfect: dirt and power, grit and extreme wealth. I walked over to my custom mahogany desk and woke up my multi-monitor workstation. I bypassed the standard corporate dashboard and logged directly into the secure encrypted fleet surveillance network. Every single truck in the Vertex fleet was equipped with military-grade high-definition dash cams and exterior audio receivers for liability protection. I pulled up the specific data log for my vehicle and isolated the timestamp from 10 o'clock this morning. I hit play. The high-resolution video filled my largest monitor. The audio was razor-sharp. I watched the entire pathetic spectacle unfold from the perspective of the truck's exterior lenses. There was Connor, his face twisted in a mask of panic and venom, aggressively shoving the $100 bill at my chest. The microphones picked up every single hateful word. I heard him call me a disgusting peasant. I heard him threaten to destroy me. Then the camera captured the exact moment the crisp currency fluttered down into the toxic puddle of dumpster runoff. The footage seamlessly tracked Jasmine stepping into the frame. The audio picked up Connor's frantic, sugary lie. I watched him spin his ridiculous tale about me being a homeless woman, doing community service, framing his aggressive bribery as an act of profound, wealthy charity. The camera caught the brief, piercing look Jasmine gave the embroidered logo on my chest before she turned her back on him. It was a masterpiece of digital evidence. I extracted the video file and saved it to an encrypted flash drive. I pulled up the Vanguard Holdings dossier my plant manager had given me earlier. Jasmine's direct corporate email address was listed right there on the executive contact sheet. I opened a new blank message. I attached the high-definition video file. I hovered my mouse cursor directly over the send button. My index finger twitched. Sending this single email would instantly obliterate Connor's fake life. It would expose his vile character to the woman holding his entire future in her hands. It would completely blow up my parents' desperate, fraudulent scheme before the day was even over. It was the easy kill. But I slowly pulled my hand away from the mouse. The easy kill was not the right kill. Jasmine was a brilliant, predatory corporate lawyer. She did not build her career by reacting blindly to anonymous emails containing messy street altercations. If I sent her this video right now, Connor would undoubtedly spin another web of lies. He would claim the video was altered, or that I was a deranged stalker trying to extort his wealthy family. Brenda and Richard would back him up, painting me as a lunatic trying to ruin their perfect son. More importantly, dropping this video would only expose his bad character, not his catastrophic financial fraud. I needed Jasmine to see the absolute terrifying truth about the mountain of debt she was about to marry into. I needed to let her analytical mind work. She had seen the Vertex logo. She was already digging. I needed to let the tension stretch until the trap was perfectly primed. I deleted the draft email and closed the surveillance window. Patience was the ultimate weapon of the wealthy. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair and rubbed the tension from my temples. The silence of the penthouse office was thick and heavy. A sharp, distinct chime suddenly broke the quiet. I opened my eyes and looked at the primary monitor. A notification popped up in the corner of the screen. It was not a standard internal message from my dispatch team or a calendar reminder. It was a high-security direct communication that had bypassed the standard corporate filters and landed straight into my private CEO inbox. I clicked on the notification. The sender name made my heart skip a beat. Jasmine. She had not wasted a single second. I stared at the bold text on the screen. The subject line was direct, unapologetic, and completely devoid of corporate fluff. It read, "I saw your employee being harassed today. I want a private meeting with the CEO, tomorrow." A genuine predatory smile spread across my face. The bait had been taken. The brilliant lawyer thought she was stepping in to demand justice for a lowly, mistreated sanitation worker. She thought she was going to lecture a faceless corporate executive about operational safety and public harassment. She had no idea she had just scheduled an appointment with the very woman she saw in the alleyway. The Vanguard audit was officially starting early, and I was going to give her the greatest corporate presentation of her entire career. I immediately moved my hand back to the mouse and clicked reply. I did not write the message as myself. I typed a swift, highly professional response from the official office of the chief executive. I thanked Vanguard Holdings for reaching out directly and stated that Vertex Waste Solutions took all reports of public harassment with the utmost seriousness. I scheduled the private meeting for 10 o'clock the following morning, right here in the penthouse boardroom. I hit send and watched the confirmation flash across my screen. I picked up my desk phone and pressed the speed dial for my executive assistant Sarah and my head of building security. I needed this trap set flawlessly. I instructed them that the lead legal counsel for Vanguard Holdings would be arriving tomorrow morning. I ordered them to treat her with absolute platinum-level respect. But I also issued a strict, non-negotiable directive. My name and my face were to be entirely scrubbed from the ground floor reception area. Take my digital portrait off the lobby directory, I told my security chief. Instruct the front desk staff and the elevator concierges to refer to me strictly as the CEO or the chief executive. I do not want the name Riley spoken out loud anywhere on the ground floor. When Jasmine arrives, give her the VIP escort directly to my private boardroom. She is not to wait in the lobby for a single second. They confirmed my orders without hesitation. My staff knew better than to question a direct mandate from the top. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the deep satisfaction of absolute control. The Vanguard audit was no longer just a business transaction. It was a perfectly orchestrated dismantling of a massive lie. A harsh vibration against my thigh broke my concentration. I pulled my personal cell phone from my pocket. The screen lit up with a barrage of incoming text messages. The sender name was Brenda. My mother had apparently recovered from her morning panic attack and was now launching a desperate, aggressive offensive. I opened the message thread and read the block of frantic, furious text. "I do not know what sick game you are playing by stalking your brother," her message read. "You purposely brought your filthy truck to that cafe just to ruin his brunch. You are a bitter, jealous, pathetic woman. Connor is traumatized by your ambush. If you ever drive that disgusting vehicle near his apartment or his fiancée again, your father and I will call the police. We are already speaking to a lawyer about getting a permanent restraining order against you. You are a danger to this family. Stay away from us." I stared at the glowing screen. The sheer magnitude of her delusion was breathtaking. She was threatening a billionaire CEO with a restraining order for driving a commercial vehicle on a legally contracted route. She was accusing me of stalking the very brother who was actively defrauding the woman he planned to marry. My parents were so deeply entrenched in their own toxic fantasy that they actually believed they held the moral high ground. They thought they could use fear and police threats to keep the garbage collector in her place. They still thought I was the scared, vulnerable girl they had kicked to the curb years ago. They had no idea that I commanded a fleet of 400 trucks and a team of top-tier corporate lawyers who could crush them before lunch. I did not type a long emotional paragraph defending my actions. I did not point out that Connor did not even own an apartment in that neighborhood, but was merely renting a closet-sized studio with their stolen equity. I did not engage with her toxic manipulation. Instead, I gave her exactly the kind of cold, calculated response that would keep her completely in the dark until the final hammer dropped. I tapped my fingers across the digital keyboard. "Don't worry, I'll be seeing you in a much nicer neighborhood very soon." I hit send. I watched the status change to delivered, and then I blocked her number. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, surgical precision. The time for family negotiations had ended a long time ago. Tomorrow was strictly business. The next morning, I arrived at the Vertex skyscraper before the sun even fully cleared the horizon. I bypassed the neon safety gear and dressed for corporate warfare. I chose a custom-tailored midnight blue designer suit with sharp architectural lines that projected total authority. I wore my hair pulled back into a sleek, unforgiving style. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror in my private bathroom, checking every detail. The woman looking back at me was a predator at the absolute top of the food chain. By 9:45, I was seated at the head of the massive mahogany table in my private boardroom. The room was designed to intimidate. The glass walls offered a dizzying view of the city streets far below. I placed a single thick manila folder perfectly in the center of the table. Inside were the comprehensive financial reports detailing Connor's catastrophic debt and my parents' fraudulent second mortgage. I turned on the discrete security monitor built into the surface of my desk. The high-definition camera feed showed the grand lobby of the Vertex building. At exactly 9:55, the heavy revolving glass doors spun open. Jasmine walked in. She looked magnificent. She wore a sharp crimson pantsuit and carried a sleek leather briefcase. Her posture was impeccable, projecting the confidence of a woman who commanded respect the second she entered a room. She marched straight to the reception desk, her dark eyes scanning the pristine marble-lined lobby. I watched the receptionist greet her warmly, offering a polite bow before handing her a platinum-embedded security pass. Jasmine did not look around for my name on the walls. She was completely focused on the mission. She thought she was about to sit down with a stuffy old money corporate executive to demand justice for a street-level employee. She believed she held all the cards. The security feed switched to the private executive elevator. I watched Jasmine step inside her reflection visible in the polished steel doors. She checked her watch, her expression unreadable and fiercely professional. The digital floor indicator ticked upward, climbing rapidly toward the penthouse suite. My heart beat in a steady, measured rhythm. The elevator chimed softly down the hall. I heard the heavy, rhythmic click of her designer heels stepping onto the plush carpet of the executive floor. My assistant's voice murmured a polite greeting, guiding the Vanguard lead counsel toward the boardroom doors. I folded my hands, resting them on top of the manila folder. I kept my eyes locked on the frosted glass entry doors. The trap was perfectly primed, and the elite lawyer was about to walk right into a revelation that would change both of our lives forever. The frosted glass doors slid open with a soft, expensive glide. My executive assistant stepped aside, gesturing gracefully into the expansive room. Jasmine crossed the threshold, her crimson pantsuit contrasting sharply with the cool, minimalist tones of my boardroom. She carried herself with the absolute assurance of a woman accustomed to walking into hostile corporate environments and bending them to her will. She expected to find a bureaucratic sparring match over labor rights and public harassment protocols. She expected to find a stuffy, gray-haired corporate executive sitting at the head of the table, ready to offer a generic apology for the incident in the alleyway. I kept my high-backed leather executive chair turned toward the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out at the morning city skyline. I let the silence stretch for 5 deliberate seconds. I wanted her to feel the weight of the room, the sheer scale of the power dynamic she was stepping into. Then I pressed the toe of my designer pump against the floor and slowly swiveled the chair around to face her. Jasmine stopped dead in her tracks. Her confident predatory stride halted instantly. I watched her dark, intelligent eyes lock onto my face. She rapidly processed the sleek, midnight blue tailored suit, the immaculate hair, the absolute lack of high-visibility neon or industrial grease. But the facial features were identical. The eyes were the exact same ones that had stared her down in the grimy alleyway just 24 hours ago. I saw the rapid calculation happening in her mind, the momentary short circuit of a brilliant legal brain trying to reconcile the sanitation worker from the street with the billionaire chief executive sitting in front of her. I rested my elbows on the polished mahogany table, steepled my fingers, and let a calm, razor-sharp smile touch my lips. "Hello, future sister-in-law," I said, my voice echoing clearly in the quiet acoustics of the boardroom. Jasmine did not gasp. She did not stumble backwards or faint. She was a professional apex predator, and she recovered her composure with terrifying speed. She closed the heavy glass doors behind her with a firm click, sealing us inside the soundproof room. She marched directly to the opposite end of the long mahogany table, planted her hands flat on the polished wood, and leaned forward. The air between us practically crackled with high-voltage tension. "I am going to ask you exactly one time," Jasmine said, her voice dropping to a low, lethal register. "What kind of bizarre, twisted street theater was that yesterday? You let a man shove money into your chest and call you a homeless peasant while you stood next to a commercial garbage truck. Now you are sitting in the penthouse suite of a $300 million corporation wearing a custom suit. Who exactly are you, and what kind of sick game are you playing with my firm and my engagement?" I did not flinch at her aggressive tone. In fact, my respect for her multiplied. She was not intimidated by the wealth or the deception. She was furiously demanding the truth. "My name is Riley," I answered evenly. "I am the founder and chief executive officer of Vertex Waste Solutions. The garbage truck you saw yesterday is one of 400 in my personal fleet. And the man who called me a disgusting peasant, the man currently wearing your diamond engagement ring, is my biological older brother Connor." Jasmine stared at me, her sharp mind absorbing the nuclear bomb I had just dropped. She did not immediately yell that I was a liar. She processed the physical resemblance, the unbothered confidence I displayed in the alley, and the fact that Connor had completely panicked at the sight of me. "Your brother?" She repeated the words, tasting like poison in her mouth. "Connor told me he comes from a long line of investment banking executives. He told me his family has a generational trust. He said you were a vagrant doing community service. Why would a man lie about his own sister being a highly successful corporate CEO? Because my family despises honest labor," I stated coldly, leaning forward to ensure every word landed with maximum impact. "My parents, Brenda and Richard, think dealing with trash is a humiliating disease. They banned me from my own father's birthday dinner simply because they were terrified my blue-collar reputation would scare off your elite old money family. They think a neon safety vest is a mark of poverty, completely blind to the fact that I own the entire commercial infrastructure of this city. They wanted to project an image of flawless aristocratic wealth, and my gritty industrial empire did not fit their shallow aesthetic." Jasmine's jaw tightened. She stood up straight, crossing her arms over her chest. The anger radiating from her was palpable, but it was a highly controlled, dangerous kind of anger. The anger of a woman who realizes she has been strategically played. "So your family is classist and arrogant," she noted, her legal mind rapidly organizing the facts. "That explains why they hid you in the shadows. But it does not explain why Connor looked like he was about to have a fatal heart attack when he tried to physically bribe you to leave that alleyway. He was not just embarrassed by you, Riley. He was absolutely terrified of you. What does a corporate CEO have on a generational investment banker that makes him sweat like a cornered rat in the middle of a Sunday brunch?" I unclasped my hands and picked up the heavy, thick manila folder resting in the center of my desk. The crisp paper felt heavy with the weight of my family's impending ruin. I looked her dead in the eye, dropping the final veil of polite corporate conversation. Because Connor is not an investment banker, I declared my voice hard and unforgiving. Because my family does not have a generational trust. Because everything you know about the man you are preparing to marry is a meticulously crafted predatory lie designed to leech off your family's real estate dynasty. He was terrified of my presence because I am the one person who knows exactly how pathetic and broke he truly is. With a swift, deliberate motion, I slid the heavy manila folder across the smooth surface of the mahogany table. The glossy cardboard glided perfectly over the polished wood, coming to a dead stop, exactly 2 inches from Jasmine's manicured hands. I sat back in my leather chair and watched her gaze drop to the classified dossier. "Open it," I commanded softly. "Open it, and look at the financial guillotine your charming fiancé has been hiding behind his rented tailored suits." Jasmine did not hesitate. Her manicured fingers flipped open the heavy manila cover. She did not ask for a sympathetic backstory or a tearful explanation of my toxic family dynamics. She was a high-stakes corporate attorney. She operated exclusively in the realm of hard evidence, and I had just handed her a mountain of it. The first page was a comprehensive credit report, illuminated with glaring red flags. I sat in absolute silence, watching her dark eyes dart across the columns of data. I did not complain about my parents ignoring my childhood achievements or how they treated me like an outcast for choosing a blue-collar industry. I let the numbers do all the screaming. "Connor is not a senior investment banker," I stated smoothly, breaking the silence only to provide context to the financial ruin she was absorbing. "He is a mid-level analyst. His actual annual salary barely covers the monthly lease on that sports car he drives. Turn to page 3. Jasmine turned the heavy parchment page. Her face remained a mask of absolute concentration. "He is drowning in exactly $1.2 million of debt." I continued, my voice echoing clinically in the glass-walled boardroom. "You will see a series of defaulted personal loans with astronomical interest rates, maxed-out credit cards, and a massive trail of offshore gambling losses. Your fiancé is a financial corpse." Jasmine traced a perfectly polished fingernail down the column of defaulted accounts. She did not gasp. She did not shed a single tear of heartbreak. Instead, the temperature in the room plummeted. The betrayal was not breaking her heart. It was directly insulting her intelligence. "This is a manufactured identity," Jasmine noted, her voice dangerously flat. "He told me he bought his vintage Rolex at a private charity auction in Geneva. Page 2 shows a desperate credit charge at a luxury replica dealer." "He does not own a passport," I confirmed coldly. "He has never been to Geneva in his entire life. He has been using short-term high-yield debt to lease designer clothes, secure VIP country club memberships, and buy his way into your elite social circles. He is running a massive deficit on his own life. A parasite needs a host to survive this long without declaring bankruptcy." Jasmine deduced, her legal mind processing the fraud at lightning speed. "How is he hiding this from the collections agencies?" "Turn to page 5, I instructed, leaning back in my ergonomic leather chair. Jasmine flipped the page. Her eyes locked onto the property deeds and wire transfer logs. "My parents, Brenda and Richard, are entirely complicit in this scam," I explained. "They recently took out a massive second mortgage on their suburban retirement home. They completely liquidated their savings accounts. They are funneling every single dollar of their remaining equity directly into Connor's checking account to keep his fake elite lifestyle afloat." Jasmine stared at the bank transfer logs. The sheer audacity of the scheme was laid bare in black and white ink. "They are betting their house on him," Jasmine said softly, a terrifying edge creeping into her tone. "They are knowingly funding a massive illusion." "They are betting their house on you, Jasmine," I corrected sharply. "You are not a beloved future daughter-in-law to them. You are a wealthy mark. They looked at your family's real estate empire and saw a limitless bailout. They are banking on the fact that once the marriage certificate is signed, your powerful family will quietly pay off Connor's catastrophic debt to avoid a messy public society scandal. They set you up to be financially drained by a con artist." The silence that followed was heavy, thick, and electric. Jasmine closed the dossier. The crisp slap of the cardboard hitting the mahogany table echoed like a gunshot in the penthouse office. She placed her hands flat on the closed folder, her knuckles turning slightly white from the force of her grip. I watched the transformation happen in real time. A weaker woman would have broken down crying over the betrayal of her future husband. A naive woman would have immediately reached for her phone to call Connor, begging to hear his side of the story and hoping for a misunderstanding. But Jasmine was a predator born into an elite Chicago dynasty that ruthlessly protected its own legacy. She did not feel sorrow. She felt pure, unadulterated fury at the audacity of a mediocre man attempting to scam her family. She slowly looked up at me. Her dark eyes were entirely devoid of warmth. They were pitch black, ice cold, and intensely calculating. She had just realized she was sharing a bed with a thief who thought she was stupid enough to be his personal ATM. At our engagement dinner, Brenda held my hands and cried. Jasmine recalled her voice dropping to a lethal whisper. She told me I was the absolute answer to her prayers. I thought she was being sentimental. I did not realize she was literally praying for a financial bailout. My mother is a master of performance art, I warned her. She views human beings as assets or liabilities. Connor is her failing asset and you were her targeted acquisition. They banned me from the family because my honest labor threatened to expose their fraudulent existence. You brought me up to this penthouse under the pretense of a corporate environmental audit, Jasmine noted, staring directly into my eyes. But you are actually delivering a full forensic accounting of my fiancé. I consider it a professional courtesy between two businesswomen, I replied, maintaining her fierce gaze. Vertex Waste Solutions specializes in identifying and removing toxic hazards. I am simply pointing out a massive biohazard currently sitting in your living room. Jasmine tapped her manicured fingernail against the closed manila folder. A sharp, predatory smile began to form on her lips. It was a terrifying expression. It was the look of a woman who had just shifted from being a victim to becoming an executioner. She realized she had been playing with a con artist, and she was already deciding exactly how to destroy him. Jasmine did not throw the folder across the room. She did not raise her voice or break down into tears. The terrifying calm of her demeanor was infinitely more dangerous. She slowly pushed her chair back and stood up from the mahogany table, her designer heels clicking against the hardwood floor as she paced toward the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. My parents, David and Patricia, did not build our family empire by being gullible. Jasmine began, her voice resonating with a deep ancestral pride. My father bought his first property, a dilapidated 4-unit apartment building on the south side of Chicago, when banks were still actively redlining black neighborhoods. They denied him commercial loans. They laughed in his face. They told him he did not belong in the commercial real estate sector. She turned away from the glass, her dark eyes locking onto mine with an intensity that commanded absolute silence. My mother worked 3 separate jobs to fund the legal retainers required to fight the zoning boards. Jasmine continued, her words sharp and rhythmic. They fought tooth and nail for every single square inch of the legacy I stand on today. They endured systemic racism, corporate sabotage, and ruthless competitors who wanted to see them fail. They built a billion-dollar dynasty out of grit, blood, and an absolute refusal to be defeated. Because of what they survived, there is one specific type of person my parents despise above all else. Jasmine walked slowly back to the boardroom table and rested her fingertips on the leather back of her chair. They despise liars, she stated, her tone dropping to a lethal pitch. They despise gold diggers who think they are entitled to the fruits of someone else's labor. And Connor thought he could bypass all of that. He thought he could just rent a luxury car, slap a fake replica watch on his wrist, and charm his way into the vault my parents bled to build. I watched the profound realization wash over her. It was not just a romantic betrayal. It was an insult to her entire bloodline. He looked at me, Jasmine said, a bitter, dangerous laugh escaping her lips, and he saw a naive, wealthy woman. He saw an ATM wrapped in an engagement ring. He genuinely believed that because I grew up with money, I was stupid enough to mistake his desperate leased facade for actual substance. He thought I was just a diversity trophy he could parade around his country club while secretly using my family's capital to wipe out his gambling debts. He underestimated you, I said plainly, leaning forward and resting my arms on the table. My brother has always believed he is the smartest person in the room. He relies on people being too polite or too intimidated to question his narrative. My parents enabled that delusion his entire life. They taught him that appearances matter more than reality, and they convinced themselves that your family would be so eager to have him as a son-in-law that you would overlook a few financial discrepancies. Jasmine's grip on the chair tightened until her knuckles turned pale. The utter disrespect of the scheme was fueling a fire inside her that no amount of corporate diplomacy could extinguish. A few financial discrepancies, Jasmine echoed, her voice vibrating with pure rage. $1.2 million in debt is not a discrepancy. It is a catastrophic failure of character. And your parents financing this fraud by secretly mortgaging their retirement home makes them active accomplices in a predatory scam. They wanted to sacrifice my family's hard-earned wealth to save their golden boy from the consequences of his own pathetic decisions. She began to pace again, her sharp legal mind rapidly dissecting the situation and calculating the optimal trajectory for retaliation. "He stood in that alleyway and called you a disgusting peasant," Jasmine said, her tone dripping with revulsion. "He looked at a woman doing honest, grueling work, and he sneered. Meanwhile, he is wearing a suit paid for by his elderly parents' second mortgage. The sheer, unadulterated cowardice of a man who produces nothing, contributes nothing, and steals everything, looking down on a woman who actually built an empire." "It is the family tradition," I replied, my expression unyielding. "They worship the illusion of success and despise the effort required to actually achieve it." Connor has been groomed since childhood to believe he deserves the world on a silver platter, regardless of who has to pay for it. "My father would have eaten him alive," Jasmine stated, a fierce pride returning to her voice. "David built his company by shaking hands with construction workers, plumbers, and sanitation crews. He knows that the people wearing the high-visibility vests are the ones who actually keep the city running. Connor thought he could impress me by insulting you. He did not realize he was displaying the exact weakness my family despises." Jasmine carefully placed her hands flat on the table, her manicured fingers smoothing over the cover of the dossier. The energy in the boardroom had shifted from a revelation of betrayal to a war council. We were no longer two strangers separated by a garbage truck and a cafe patio. We were two powerful businesswomen staring at a mutual enemy. "So how do we dismantle the illusion?" I asked, watching her closely. "Connor is terrified of being exposed, but he is also a master at deflecting blame. If you confront him in private, he will lie, beg, and manipulate. He will try to gaslight you into believing these financial reports are fake or a temporary misunderstanding." "I know exactly how corporate fraudsters operate," Jasmine replied, her predatory smile returning. "You never confront a liar behind closed doors. You corner them under the brightest lights possible. You force them to answer for their crimes when their entire audience is watching, stripping away every possible exit route. If I break off the engagement quietly, Connor will control the narrative. He will play the devastated, heartbroken gentleman. He will tell his wealthy social circles that I was too demanding, or that the pressure of my family's expectations drove us apart. Your mother will spin a tragic story about how her perfect son was mistreated by the cold, calculating corporate lawyer. They will paint themselves as the victims and continue hunting for their next wealthy target." "They will absolutely play the victim," I confirmed, knowing my mother's tactics better than anyone. "Brenda will host a catered pity party by the end of the week. She will use the breakup to garner sympathy from everyone in her country club. She thrives on manipulating public perception." Jasmine stopped pacing. She stood at the edge of the mahogany table looking down at the manila folder containing the forensic evidence of my family's financial ruin. When she looked back up at me, the transition was complete. The grieving fiancé was gone. The ruthless Vanguard legal counsel had fully taken the reins. "I am not going to let them control the narrative," Jasmine declared, her voice cold, flat, and absolute. "I am not going to quietly step aside and let a con artist walk away with his reputation intact. Connor tried to scam a family that fought through hell to get to the top. He thought I was an easy mark." She picked up the manila folder, holding the weight of my brother's destruction in her hands. "I refuse to just walk away," Jasmine said, leaning over the table so our faces were only inches apart. Her dark eyes burned with an unforgiving, spectacular fire. "We are not doing this quietly, Riley. We need to burn his house of cards to the ground, publicly." I smiled at her fierce declaration. A public execution. It was exactly the kind of ruthless, inescapable justice my family deserved. Jasmine pulled her leather chair back and sat down, placing the dossier flat on the polished mahogany table. She smoothed her manicured hands over the heavy cardboard cover, her brilliant legal mind already organizing the brutal logistics of the ambush. "This Saturday evening, my family is hosting the annual City Hope Gala." Jasmine said, her dark eyes locking onto mine with absolute predatory focus. "It is the most exclusive philanthropic event of the season in Chicago. Governors, tech billionaires, and the most powerful real estate moguls in the country will be in attendance. The media coverage is always extensive. Connor has been practically hyperventilating with excitement for a month. He bought a custom tuxedo on a new line of credit, no doubt. Brenda and Richard are flying in tomorrow, treating this charity event like their official coronation into high society. They genuinely believe they are about to be formally introduced to the elite inner circle as my future in-laws." I could picture the pathetic scene perfectly. Brenda probably spent the last 3 weeks practicing her fake aristocratic laugh in the mirror and rehearsing fabricated grandiose stories about my father's non-existent business triumphs. Connor would be busy working the ballroom floor, desperately trying to secure investments for imaginary portfolios just to pay off the massive interest on his gambling debts. They thought they had finally made it to the top of the food chain. They had no idea they were walking straight into a slaughterhouse. "I want you there," Jasmine stated, reaching into her sleek designer briefcase and sliding a heavy matte black metal card across the mahogany table. "That is a platinum access pass. You are coming as my personal VIP guest. You will be seated at the head table alongside my parents and the mayor of the city. When Connor and your mother walk into that grand ballroom expecting to be treated like royalty, I want them to see the daughter they threw away like trash, sitting at the absolute pinnacle of power." I picked up the heavy metal access pass, feeling the cool weight of it in my palm. The personal vengeance was going to be spectacular, but we were both women who dealt in concrete assets and corporate leverage. We needed to solidify the professional foundation of this newly formed partnership. "The public destruction of my brother is a fantastic appetizer," I said, setting the metal pass down on the table. "But let us talk about the main course. Vanguard Holdings requires a waste management infrastructure that can handle a $2 billion development project without a single operational flaw. Your family cannot afford a liability on the back end of this massive eco-project. You need a partner with absolute financial solvency, transparent accounting, and ruthless operational control." Jasmine leaned forward, her corporate persona re-engaging seamlessly with my own. "The board is extremely hesitant to partner with anyone who cannot guarantee zero landfill waste," she admitted. "The upfront capital required to build a specialized sorting facility for a project of this magnitude is staggering. Most sanitation companies we interviewed are demanding Vanguard cover the initial construction costs before they even deploy a single truck." I did not hesitate. Vertex Waste Solutions will not ask Vanguard Holdings for a single dime of construction capital, I declared, my voice ringing with absolute financial authority. "I will fully fund the entire back-end eco-infrastructure myself. We will build a dedicated, state-of-the-art recycling facility exclusively for your mega project. I have the liquid capital to underwrite the development immediately. In exchange, Vertex gets the exclusive binding 50-year operational contract for all Vanguard properties moving forward." Jasmine stared at me rapidly, calculating the sheer financial weight of the offer I had just placed on the table. I was bringing tens of millions of dollars in liquid capital to the negotiation without blinking. It was the ultimate display of corporate dominance. I was solving her massive logistical headache in a single stroke, proving unequivocally that the woman in the high-visibility vest was a heavy-hitting industry titan. I was standing in stark contrast to her fiancé, a man who had to beg his elderly parents for brunch money. "You have yourself a deal, Riley," Jasmine said, a genuine, terrifying smile finally breaking across her face. "My father is going to absolutely love you. We will have the preliminary contracts drafted and ready for review by Monday morning. But first, we have a gala to crash. We stood up and shook hands firmly across the mahogany table, sealing an alliance that would generate hundreds of millions of dollars and simultaneously destroy the toxic people who had tried to play us. Jasmine left the penthouse shortly after heading back to her corporate office to prepare the legal slaughter of her fiancé. I had my own preparations to handle. If I was going to sit at the head table of the most elite gala in the city, I could not just look successful. I needed to look like a woman who owned the skyline. I left the office early and directed my private driver to the most exclusive appointment-only boutique in the luxury retail district. The moment I walked through the heavy glass doors, the boutique manager rushed over, recognizing my name immediately from my platinum corporate account. I told her I did not want something safe, modest, or understated. I wanted a dress that would stop the entire room. I wanted an outfit that would make my mother physically ill with jealousy the second she laid eyes on me. After 2 hours of private fittings and relentless tailoring, I found the ultimate weapon. It was a breathtaking custom-fitted haute couture gown in a deep, striking emerald green. The fabric was spun silk that caught the light like liquid glass, shimmering with every step I took. The architectural lines of the dress were sharp, commanding, and unapologetically fierce. It paired perfectly with a diamond collar necklace I had purchased to celebrate closing my first major municipal contract years ago. The total cost of the gown was a staggering $15,000. I handed the boutique manager my black card without a single second of hesitation. It was worth every penny to ensure my family recognized the catastrophic mistake they had made. I stood in front of the massive trifold mirror in the boutique, studying my reflection from every angle. The grime and grease of the recycling plant were entirely gone. The discarded, unwanted daughter they had banned from a birthday dinner was dead. The woman looking back at me was an untouchable corporate queen, armed in a $15,000 armor and holding the power to completely obliterate her family's toxic illusions. The stage was perfectly set, the trap was locked. Saturday night was fast approaching, and the ultimate collision was finally here. Saturday night arrived with a chilling electric anticipation. The grand ballroom of the City Historical Society building had been transformed into an absolute masterpiece of elite opulence. Massive crystal chandeliers cascaded from the vaulted ceilings, casting a brilliant, warm glow over the hundreds of attendees. Waiters in immaculate white tailcoats glided seamlessly across the polished marble floors, carrying heavy silver trays loaded with crystal flutes of vintage champagne and delicate caviar hors d'oeuvres. This was the highly exclusive City Hope Gala, the absolute epicenter of high society power and wealth in Chicago. Standing near a towering ice sculpture in the center of the room, completely oblivious to their impending doom, were Brenda, Richard, and Connor. They looked like a picture-perfect aristocratic family, but the entire display was a fragile, pathetic illusion. Brenda wore a heavily beaded silver gown that looked expensive from a distance, but was undoubtedly a weekend rental. Richard stood rigidly in a stiff, outdated tuxedo, holding his champagne glass like a stage prop. Connor was playing the role of the wealthy, sophisticated fiancé with sickening enthusiasm. He wore a custom velvet dinner jacket that he had definitely purchased on a new high-interest credit line. His hair was slicked back and he flashed his charming, practiced smile at anyone wearing expensive jewelry. They were putting on the performance of a lifetime. Brenda laughed loudly, tossing her head back as she chatted with a group of local politicians and wealthy socialites. She was actively name-dropping restaurants she had never eaten at and charity boards she had never been invited to join. She genuinely believed she had fooled the entire room. She thought her son's impending marriage to a billionaire real estate heiress had instantly elevated her from a middle-class suburban housewife to a high-society matriarch. Connor was currently cornering his future father-in-law near the main bar. David stood tall and imposing. He was a brilliant, self-made African-American real estate mogul who commanded the room with effortless, quiet authority. Beside him stood his wife, Patricia, looking absolutely regal in a flowing sapphire blue evening gown. David and Patricia had fought through decades of ruthless systemic barriers to build a billion-dollar dynasty from the ground up. They were the very definition of elite, uncompromising power. Connor leaned in, holding his drink with a relaxed, arrogant grip. He was aggressively pitching a phantom investment portfolio to David, treating the billionaire like an easy target. The offshore markets are showing incredible yields. This quarter, David Connor lied smoothly, his voice dripping with fake expertise. My firm is heavily prioritizing emerging tech sectors. I actually have a highly exclusive private equity fund opening up next week. It usually requires a massive minimum buy-in, but since we are practically family now, I could easily secure a priority position for Vanguard Holdings. It would be a mutually beneficial arrangement. David took a slow, measured sip of his premium bourbon. He did not smile. He did not eagerly ask for the investment prospectus. His dark, intelligent eyes locked onto Connor's face, with a gaze so sharp it could cut glass. David already knew the absolute truth. Jasmine had briefed her parents extensively the night before. David knew this charming, slick-haired man standing in front of him was not an investment banking executive. He knew Connor was a desperate lying fraud drowning in over $1 million of toxic gambling debt. He knew Connor was attempting to secure a fake investment purely to steal their family capital and pay off his loan sharks before his legs got broken. Brenda rushed over, eager to insert herself into the conversation with the billionaires. "Oh, you simply must listen to Connor." Brenda chimed in, placing a heavily manicured hand on her son's shoulder. "He has always possessed such a brilliant financial mind, just like his father. Richard recently restructured several major municipal bonds back home. We are just a family that understands the absolute necessity of growing generational wealth." Patricia exchanged a brief microscopic glance with her husband. The sheer audacity of Brenda's lie was staggering. Patricia knew that Brenda and Richard had secretly taken out a massive second mortgage on their retirement home just to fund Connor's leased sports car and fake designer watches. They were actively bleeding themselves dry and risking homelessness to maintain this pathetic illusion of grandeur. "Generational wealth is indeed a complex subject," David replied, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute terrifying calm. "It requires strict transparency, fierce loyalty, and a complete lack of deception. My family does not tolerate financial risks, Connor. We investigate every single ledger before we commit our capital. I assume a man of your supposed caliber welcomes a rigorous forensic audit." Connor swallowed hard. A tiny bead of cold sweat formed at his temple, despite the cool air conditioning of the ballroom. He forced a loud laugh, waving his free hand dismissively. "Of course, David. Absolute transparency is my personal guarantee. You will find my ledgers absolutely spotless. We can schedule a meeting with my wealth management team next week." Connor believed he had survived the interrogation. He took a long sip of his champagne, puffing his chest out with arrogant pride. He thought he had successfully manipulated one of the most powerful men in the city. He genuinely believed his catastrophic financial sins were safely hidden in the dark. He thought his ultimate victory and his massive financial bailout were only hours away. But Connor's miserable illusion was about to be shattered into a million pieces in front of hundreds of people. The gentle hum of classical music and wealthy chatter suddenly faltered. The string quartet playing on the elevated stage abruptly stopped mid-note, their bows hovering awkwardly over their instruments. A sudden heavy silence swept rapidly across the massive ballroom, moving like a physical wave from the entrance all the way to the main bar. Brenda turned her head, annoyed by the sudden quiet. Connor frowned, looking toward the grand foyer. The massive, heavy oak doors at the grand entrance of the ballroom swung wide open. The room went completely terrifyingly quiet. I stepped across the threshold, allowing the heavy oak doors to close softly behind me. The silence in the grand ballroom was absolute and electrifying. Hundreds of the most powerful politicians, tech billionaires, and real estate moguls in Chicago turned their heads in unison. They were looking at me. I did not wear a neon yellow safety vest. I did not carry the scent of diesel exhaust or commercial refuse. I wore the $15,000 custom haute couture gown. The deep emerald spun silk clung to my frame with architectural perfection, catching the brilliant light of the cascading crystal chandeliers. The fabric flowed around my legs like liquid glass with every measured predatory step I took. Around my neck rested a heavy, flawless diamond collar that flashed with cold, blinding fire. I held my head high, projecting the unmistakable, untouchable aura of a woman who completely owned the skyline. A blinding flurry of white light erupted near the entrance. The official society photographers hired to document the absolute elite of the city instantly recognized power when it walked into a room. They raised their heavy cameras and began snapping dozens of photographs in rapid succession. The loud mechanical clicking of camera shutters echoed sharply against the marble walls. The quiet murmurs of the wealthy guests began to rise, buzzing with intense curiosity and immediate respect. They did not know my face, but they instantly recognized that I was a heavy-hitting industry titan. Directly across the massive expanse of the ballroom, standing frozen near the main bar, my family was experiencing a catastrophic system failure. Brenda stood paralyzed. Her mouth hung open in a grotesque mask of sheer, unadulterated horror. Her fingers went completely numb. The crystal flute slipped directly through her grip. The glass hit the polished marble floor with a sharp, violent crash. Shards of expensive crystal exploded outward, sending a spray of premium champagne directly onto the hem of her rented silver evening gown. She did not even flinch. She did not look down at the mess. Her wide, terrified eyes remained locked entirely on me. Connor looked significantly worse. The blood drained from his face so fast, he looked like a chalk-white corpse dressed in a velvet tuxedo. His jaw clenched and his chest heaved as he stopped breathing entirely. He was staring at the exact same woman he had aggressively cornered in a filthy, wet alleyway just days ago. He was looking at the woman he had violently bribed with a crumpled $100 bill. His desperate, fraudulent brain tried to process the impossible reality standing in front of him. The City Hope Gala possessed the most ruthless, uncompromising security protocols in the entire state. Guests required heavily vetted platinum access passes, extensive background checks, and strict biometric scans just to get past the outer gates. You could not bribe your way into this ballroom. You could not sneak through a side door. You could not wear a $15,000 custom silk gown and a diamond collar on a sanitation worker's salary. Connor realized in a fraction of a second that I had not crashed the party. I had been officially invited. And if I was invited to the most exclusive philanthropic event of the year, it meant his entire narrative about my pathetic, impoverished existence was a massive, fatal lie. It meant the sister he had discarded was operating on a financial level he could not even comprehend. I stood at the top of the short, sweeping marble staircase that connected the grand foyer to the main ballroom floor. I did not look at my panicked mother or my terrified brother. My gaze swept right past their trembling figures and locked directly onto the VIP table at the center of the room. Jasmine stood next to her powerful parents. She looked absolutely spectacular. When our eyes met across the sea of elite guests, a sharp, predatory smile broke across her face. She gave me a single microscopic nod of approval. The execution was officially underway. I placed my hand on the polished brass railing and took my first step down the marble staircase. The movement broke the spell, paralyzing my family. Pure primal panic overrode their shock. Connor knew that if I walked down those stairs and mingled with the elite guests, I would inevitably speak to Jasmine. I would inevitably speak to her billionaire father, David, the man Connor had just finished feeding a mountain of financial lies. If I reached that main floor, his illusion of old money wealth would be instantly incinerated. Connor violently grabbed Brenda by the elbow. He did not bother excusing himself to David or Patricia. He abandoned the billionaires without a single word of explanation, practically dragging my mother away from the main bar. They moved with desperate, frantic speed, weaving aggressively through the crowd of wealthy patrons. They bumped into a waiter carrying a tray of hors d'oeuvres, nearly knocking him over, but they did not stop to apologize. They were running purely on the terrifying adrenaline of a cornered animal. I reached the bottom of the marble staircase and stepped onto the plush carpet of the foyer. The grand archway leading directly into the heart of the ballroom was only 20 feet away. Before I could take another step toward the brilliant lights of the main floor, two frantic figures lunged out from behind a towering floral arrangement. Connor and Brenda threw themselves directly into my path. They stood shoulder to shoulder, using their bodies to form a desperate physical barricade across the width of the marble archway. Connor was breathing heavily, his chest heaving under his rented tuxedo, while Brenda stared at me with wide, manic eyes, completely blocking my entry into the ballroom. Brenda's manicured hand shot out like a striking snake. Her fingers clamped down viciously on my bare forearm, her acrylic nails digging into my skin with desperate bruising force. I did not flinch. I did not pull away. I simply looked down at her hand, ruining the perfect drape of my $15,000 silk sleeve, and then raised my eyes to meet her terrified, furious gaze. "What are you doing here?" Brenda hissed, her voice a frantic, venomous whisper designed to stay under the radar of the wealthy guests mingling just feet away in the grand foyer. She pulled me roughly toward the shadows of a massive, cascading floral arrangement, desperately trying to hide me from the elite crowd. "Where did you steal this dress? Did you break into a boutique? Did you sleep with a bouncer at the service entrance to sneak in here? You are going to ruin everything." Her breath smelled of stale champagne and absolute panic. She looked me up and down, her eyes darting from the architectural lines of my custom gown to the heavy diamond collar resting against my collarbone. She was frantically trying to process how the daughter she had banished to the slums was suddenly dripping in high society wealth. Her brain refused to accept the reality standing right in front of her. To Brenda, I was still the filthy garbage collector. The only logical explanation in her toxic classist mind was grand larceny or prostitution. She genuinely believed I was a criminal before she would ever believe I was a success. I did not yell. I did not justify my presence or attempt to explain my net worth. I simply waited as a waiter in a crisp white tailcoat passed by our little standoff, carrying a heavy silver tray. I smoothly reached out with my free hand and lifted a crystal glass of sparkling water from the tray. I took a slow, deliberate sip, letting the cold carbonation fizz against my tongue while my mother continued to dig her nails into my arm. "Remove your hand from my arm, Brenda," I said, my voice dropping to a dangerous, icy register that sent a visible shiver down her spine. "If you snag this silk, the repair bill alone will cost more than the second mortgage you secretly took out on your retirement home." Brenda gasped, snatching her hand back as if my skin had suddenly caught fire. The explicit mention of her secret fraudulent mortgage hit her like a physical blow to the chest. She staggered back a half step, bumping directly into Connor. The color drained entirely from her face, leaving her foundation looking like a pale, cracked mask. She realized in a fraction of a second that I knew exactly how broke they truly were. Connor was sweating profusely now. The collar of his rented velvet tuxedo looked damp and deeply uncomfortable against his neck. His eyes darted frantically toward the main ballroom, terrified that Jasmine or David might wander over to investigate the commotion in the foyer. He stepped in front of Brenda, puffing out his chest in a pathetic attempt to physically intimidate me. He tried to project the authority of a wealthy investment banker, but he just looked like a desperate, cornered animal. "You need to leave this instant," Connor ordered, his voice cracking slightly under the immense pressure of his collapsing lies. "I do not know what kind of psychotic break you are having, Riley, but this is a private, high-security event for actual professionals. You are a mentally unstable stalker. If you do not turn around and walk out those doors right now, I will call the police and have you arrested for trespassing." I took another slow sip of my sparkling water, utterly unfazed by his pathetic display of false power. "A mentally unstable stalker," I repeated, rolling the absurd accusation around in my mouth. "That is a fascinating narrative, Connor. Does that story usually work when you are trying to explain away the people you owe money to? Did you use that same excuse when your bookie called during dinner last week? Are you going to tell Jasmine that the scary garbage collector is obsessed with your fabulous, wealthy lifestyle?" His face went from pale to a mottled, angry red. He clenched his fists at his sides, stepping so close I could feel the heat radiating from his panicked body. He was trying to use the same gaslighting tactics that our parents had used on me for my entire life. They always labeled my independence as instability. They always painted my honesty as mental illness to protect their own fragile egos. He thought if he called me crazy enough times, I would eventually break down and believe it. "You are insane!" Connor spat his words, hitting the air with absolute venom. You are a delusional, jealous loser who cannot handle the fact that I am marrying into a billionaire dynasty. I am about to secure our family's future, and you are trying to sabotage it because you are a pathetic garbage worker who will never amount to anything. I will tell everyone in that room that you are an obsessive lunatic who followed me here. No one will believe a word you say. Look at you. You are a complete fraud. I smiled. It was a genuine, terrifying smile that finally made the fake confidence drain completely out of his eyes. He realized in that split second that I was not reacting to his abuse. I was not shrinking away. I was standing there in a gown that cost more than his car, looking at him like he was a stain on the marble floor. I am not the one wearing a lace tuxedo and sweating through my collar. Connor? I replied softly, my voice cutting through his panic with surgical precision. And I am certainly not the one who has to beg a security guard to fight my battles. The insult shattered the last remaining piece of Connor's fragile ego. The reality of his impending doom overrode whatever sliver of rational thought he had left. He completely lost his mind. He decided to play the ultimate high society card, truly believing his fake elite status would protect him from the consequences of his actions. He spun around, raised his hand high into the air, and aggressively snapped his fingers toward the grand entrance of the venue. Security! Connor bellowed, his voice echoing loudly across the marble foyer, drawing the immediate attention of dozens of elite guests and event staff. Security. We have a trespasser here. I want the head of security over here immediately. Arrest this woman and throw her out on the street. Connor's voice echoed sharply through the grand foyer. The loud, arrogant command hung in the air, instantly freezing the nearby conversations of the elite guests. Within seconds, the heavy, measured footsteps of professional security personnel echoed across the polished marble floor. Led by the head of security, a towering, broad-shouldered man with a severe military haircut and a tailored black suit, the team moved with absolute purpose. He was flanked by two highly muscular guards who looked ready to tackle a physical threat to the ground. Connor puffed out his chest even further. He adjusted his laced velvet lapels, looking at me with a triumphant, malicious sneer. He genuinely believed that his rented tuxedo and his proximity to the main ballroom gave him the supreme authority to command these men. He thought his fake high society status was an impenetrable shield. Right here, Connor ordered, pointing a trembling, sweaty finger directly at my face as the security team approached. This woman is an uninvited trespasser. She is a known stalker with a history of severe mental instability. She has been harassing my family and trying to extort us for money. I want her physically removed from this venue immediately. Check her for stolen items and hand her over to the local authorities right now. Brenda nodded vigorously beside him, desperate to reinforce the lie. She added her own frantic, breathless accusations about how she feared for her life and how I must have forced my way through the catering service entrance. They were throwing every toxic, manipulative tactic they had ever used on me directly at the security team, expecting immediate obedience. The head of security stepped up to the edge of our tense little circle. He did not reach for his radio. He did not signal his muscular guards to grab my arms. He did not even look at Connor or Brenda. He walked right past my brother, completely ignoring the frantic, sweating man who was barking orders like a spoiled, entitled child. The large, intimidating captain stopped exactly 2 feet in front of me. He snapped his heels together, clasped his hands firmly behind his back, and bowed from the waist with absolute, unquestionable respect. "Good evening, Ms. Riley," the head of security said. His deep voice carried a tone of profound professional deference that echoed clearly in the foyer. "Welcome to the City Hope Gala. We were informed of your arrival at the VIP entrance. Is everything to your satisfaction tonight, or is this man harassing you?" The color did not just drain from Connor's face. His entire physical structure seemed to collapse inward. His jaw went slack, dropping open so wide it looked practically unhinged. Brenda let out a pathetic, high-pitched squeak, taking a stumbling step backward, until her spine hit the edge of a massive marble pillar. They stared at the head of security, utterly paralyzed by the impossibility of the scene unfolding in front of them. The authoritative man they had just summoned to execute their dirty work was currently bowing to the very garbage collector they despised. I took another slow, refreshing sip of my sparkling water. I met the security captain's eyes and offered a polite, appreciative nod. "Good evening, Captain," I replied smoothly, projecting the calm authority of a woman who owned the room. "The venue looks spectacular tonight. And to answer your question, yes. This individual stepped directly into my path and has been aggressively shouting completely fabricated accusations for the past 3 minutes. He is becoming a significant nuisance to my evening." The head of security slowly turned his massive frame around to face Connor. The respectful, polite demeanor he had shown me vanished instantly. It was replaced by a cold, hardened glare that promised immediate physical consequences. The two muscular guards flanking him stepped forward in unison, instinctively boxing Connor and Brenda into a tight, inescapable corner against the floral arrangement. "There must be a mistake," Connor stammered, his voice cracking into a pathetic high octave of sheer panic. "You do not understand who she is. I am telling you, she is a sanitation worker. She drives a trash truck. I am the fiancé of Jasmine, the lead legal counsel for Vanguard Holdings. My future father-in-law is David. You need to listen to me." The head of security did not blink. He stepped directly into Connor's personal space, forcing my brother to crane his neck upward to meet the taller man's furious gaze. "I know exactly who you are," the captain stated, his voice a low, dangerous rumble that cut right through Connor's desperate name-dropping. "You are holding a standard general admission ticket. But the woman you are currently pointing your finger at is not a trespasser. Ms. Riley is the platinum sponsor of tonight's entire gala." The captain let those words hang in the heavy air, allowing the sheer magnitude of my financial dominance to crush Connor's fragile, rented illusion. "She single-handedly underwrote the operational costs of this entire charity event." The captain continued, his tone absolutely merciless. "Her corporation provided the funding that paid for this venue, the catering, and the very security detail you just tried to order around like a fool. She is the highest-ranking VIP in this building. She practically owns the floor you are standing on." Brenda covered her mouth with both hands, letting out a muffled, horrified sob. Connor looked like a man who had just been shoved out of an airplane without a parachute. His chest heaved rapidly, but he could not draw enough oxygen into his lungs. The reality of his impending doom was suffocating him. He realized that the sister he had kicked to the curb was the primary benefactor of the elite society he was desperately trying to scam. The head of security leaned in closer to Connor, his voice dropping to a harsh, lethal whisper that carried absolute authority. "Step away from her right now, or I will have your general admission credentials permanently revoked. I will have my men drag you out the service doors and toss you onto the street. Do I make myself perfectly clear?" Connor and Brenda stood completely frozen. They looked exactly like they had just seen a ghost, completely trapped and paralyzed by the devastating, unstoppable power of the daughter they had thrown away. Connor stepped back, his chest caving inward, as if the oxygen had been entirely sucked out of the grand foyer. Brenda plastered herself flat against the cold marble pillar, her breathing shallow and erratic. I did not offer them a parting insult. I did not gloat. True power never needs to explain itself. I simply gave the security captain a polite nod of gratitude and stepped right between my paralyzed mother and my terrified brother. The heavy emerald silk of my custom gown brushed against Connor's cheap velvet tuxedo as I glided past him. He flinched like he had been burned by the fabric. I walked straight through the towering oak doors and officially entered the main ballroom. The atmosphere inside was electric. A string quartet played a sophisticated symphony over the low hum of wealthy patrons networking and securing backroom deals. The elite crowd naturally parted for me, their eyes drawn to the blinding flash of the diamond collar resting against my neck and the absolute confidence radiating from my posture. I was not sneaking in through a service elevator. I was parting the sea of high society like royalty, and every gaze in the room followed my path. I navigated the polished floor with deliberate grace, heading straight for the epicenter of the room. The head table sat elevated on a tiered platform right beneath the largest crystal chandelier. It was the absolute throne of the City Hope Gala, reserved strictly for the highest-ranking dignitaries, the mayor, and the ultimate financial benefactors. As I approached the velvet-lined steps of the platform, David stood up from his chair. The billionaire real estate mogul did not offer me a polite nod from a distance. He stepped down to the main floor to personally greet me. His massive presence commanded instant respect from the surrounding tables. "Welcome to the pinnacle, Riley," David said, his deep voice carrying a tone of absolute professional admiration. He extended his hand. I gripped it firmly, returning a handshake that communicated equal corporate dominance. "Your family knows how to throw a spectacular event, David," I replied smoothly. "Vertex Waste Solutions is incredibly proud to be the platinum sponsor tonight. We look forward to cleaning up the city together." Patricia rose from her seat, next her sapphire gown shimmering as she offered me a warm, genuine embrace. "We are honored to have you at our table, Riley," she said, her sharp eyes sparkling with predatory intelligence. "Jasmine has told us everything about your remarkable corporate empire and about the fascinating garbage that needs to be collected tonight." I stepped up onto the elevated platform and took my designated seat directly to the right of Jasmine. My future sister-in-law leaned over, her dark eyes flashing with lethal anticipation, as a waiter immediately poured premium vintage champagne into my crystal flute. "Did you enjoy the appetizer in the foyer?" Jasmine asked, her voice a low, dangerous whisper meant only for me. "The appetizer was desperate and completely panicked," I replied softly, taking a measured sip of the expensive champagne. "Connor tried to order the head of security to have me arrested for trespassing. It ended with him being threatened with physical removal from the premises. He is currently bleeding out in the lobby, trying to figure out how a peasant bought this table." Jasmine let out a dark, sophisticated laugh that sent a chill through the air. "The main course is going to be spectacular," she promised. From my elevated vantage point at the head table, I had a commanding, unobstructed view of the entire ballroom. I slowly scanned the sea of elegantly dressed guests until my eyes locked onto a small, poorly positioned table near the rear service doors. It was the general admission section. Brenda, Richard, and Connor had finally stumbled back into the ballroom. They looked like prisoners of war walking to the gallows. They collapsed into their cheap banquet chairs. Richard leaned forward aggressively, his face a mask of furious confusion. He was gesturing wildly, demanding to know what had just happened in the marble foyer and why Connor looked like he was about to vomit. Brenda covered her face with her trembling hands, her rented silver gown still stained with the champagne she had dropped earlier. Connor looked entirely hollowed out. He sat slumped in his chair, staring blankly at the white tablecloth. His hands shook violently as he reached for a water glass. He slowly lifted his heavy head, his panicked, bloodshot eyes scanning the massive room until he finally found the elevated head table. I held my crystal flute and looked directly back at him. I did not wave. I did not smile. I simply stared at him from the absolute peak of the social hierarchy he had desperately tried to infiltrate. I watched the devastating reality crush him from across the room. He was trapped. He could not stand up and run out the back doors, because fleeing the gala would be an extreme, unforgivable insult to David and Patricia. If he ran, the fraudulent investment pitch he had just delivered to the billionaire would instantly implode, and his last desperate chance at a financial bailout would vanish. But staying in the ballroom meant he was forced to sit in silent, agonizing terror, wondering exactly how much Jasmine actually knew. He was paralyzed in a cage of his own making, forced to watch the sister he had discarded sit shoulder to shoulder with the elite dynasty he was actively trying to scam. Brenda slowly lowered her shaking hands from her face. She looked up, following Connor's terrified gaze, and finally spotted me sitting on the platform. The sheer psychological horror that washed over my mother's features was breathtaking. She saw me laughing with Patricia. She saw David treating me with profound professional respect. The toxic classist illusion she had maintained for her entire life shattered completely in that single moment. The garbage collector was the queen of the room, and Brenda was trapped in the cheap seats, choking on her own toxic vanity. The ambient noise of the grand ballroom suddenly shifted. The string quartet smoothly brought their symphony to a graceful halt. The waiters quickly cleared the last of the dessert plates, stepping back silently into the shadows of the service corridors. The massive crystal chandeliers above us began to dim, casting the surrounding tables into a moody, dramatic shadow. A single brilliant white spotlight pierced the darkness, illuminating the grand stage, positioned right beside our elevated platform. The ambient chatter of the wealthy elite died down to an expectant, breathless silence. The execution hour had officially arrived. Jasmine pushed her chair back. She stood up, smoothing the front of her crimson suit jacket with absolute terrifying calm. She did not look back at Connor's table. She kept her eyes locked, dead ahead. She stepped off the VIP platform and walked methodically up the carpeted stairs to the center of the grand stage. She stepped up to the silver microphone, the bright spotlight reflecting fiercely off the diamonds on her wrists. The room was dead quiet. Jasmine tapped her manicured fingernail against the silver mesh of the microphone. The sharp, amplified sound echoed like a gunshot through the cavernous ballroom, demanding absolute attention. The elite guests settled into their seats, their faces turned upward with polite, wealthy expectation. They anticipated a standard philanthropic keynote, a gracious speech about urban development and charitable milestones. They had absolutely no idea they were about to serve as the jury for a public execution. "Good evening, distinguished guests," Jasmine began. Her voice was smooth, cultured, and resonated with the effortless authority she inherited directly from her parents. "Thank you for joining us at the City Hope Gala. Tonight, we are here to celebrate the future of Chicago. We are here to discuss sustainable growth, community investment, and the massive $2 billion eco-development project Vanguard Holdings is officially launching this quarter." A polite wave of applause rippled through the ballroom. At the back table, I could see Connor desperately trying to force a supportive smile, his hands still shaking violently in his lap. Brenda sat rigidly beside him, completely paralyzed by the terrifying proximity of her own lies. Jasmine let the applause fade into a heavy, expectant silence. She placed both hands flat on the wooden podium. When she spoke again, the warm, hospitable tone had completely vanished. Her voice dropped into a lethal, razor-sharp register that instantly lowered the temperature in the room. "Building a future requires a foundation of absolute, uncompromising truth," Jasmine stated. Her dark eyes slowly scanned the crowd, projecting a fierce intensity that made several powerful executives sit up straighter in their chairs. "Vanguard Holdings was built by my father and mother on the principles of transparency and grit. They taught me that you cannot construct a lasting empire on rented land, and you certainly cannot build a partnership with a liar." The ballroom grew unnervingly quiet. The wealthy patrons exchanged confused, microscopic glances. This was not the standard charity script. The shift in tone was palpable, aggressive, and deeply personal. "For our upcoming mega project, Vanguard required an exclusive waste management partner." Jasmine continued, her words precise and measured. "We needed a visionary. We needed a corporate leader who possessed the liquid capital to underwrite a state-of-the-art recycling facility without asking us for a single dime of upfront funding. We needed someone who built their empire with their own two hands, someone who understands the true value of honest, grueling labor." Jasmine turned her head slightly, directing her piercing gaze right toward the elevated head table. "I am thrilled to announce that we have found that partner," Jasmine declared, her voice rising with fierce, unapologetic pride. "She is a self-made eco-millionaire. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Vertex Waste Solutions. She commands a massive commercial fleet that keeps this very city running, and her enterprise generated $85 million in revenue just last quarter alone. Please direct your attention to the head table and join me in welcoming my VIP guest, Riley." A secondary blinding white spotlight snapped on. The beam cut through the dark ballroom and hit me directly. The light caught the deep emerald silk of my haute couture gown and ignited the heavy diamond collar around my neck into a blaze of cold fire. I remained seated, offering a slow, powerful nod to the crowd. A loud, unified murmur of profound respect swept across the room. Billionaires and politicians raised their crystal flutes in my direction, utterly captivated by the revelation of a new, heavy-hitting industry titan in their midst. Jasmine waited for the wave of admiration to crest before she leaned back into the microphone. She was holding a lethal weapon, and it was time to pull the trigger. "Riley is a remarkable titan of industry," Jasmine said, her voice slicing through the applause and bringing the room back to a dead, breathless silence. "But I did not invite her here tonight solely to celebrate our new corporate alliance. I invited her here to honor her incredible grace under fire. You see, Riley is also the exact same woman that my so-called fiancé aggressively cornered in a commercial alleyway just 3 days ago. The silence in the ballroom shattered. A collective audible gasp echoed off the marble walls. Hundreds of wealthy guests stiffened in their chairs, their eyes darting rapidly from the stage to me. Jasmine gripped the edges of the podium. Her eyes locked onto the cheap tables at the back of the room, like a sniper finding her target. My former fiancé walked up to this brilliant self-made CEO while she was inspecting her own commercial fleet. Jasmine announced, her voice dripping with absolute unfiltered disgust. He shoved a crumpled $100 bill into her chest. He ordered her to take her garbage truck and hide in the shadows. He looked at a woman who owns a $300 million corporation, and he explicitly referred to her as a disgusting homeless peasant. The wealthy crowd murmured in shock and outrage. The elite class despised many things, but they absolutely loathed a foolish man who humiliated a powerful peer. And do you want to know why he did it? Jasmine asked, her voice echoing like a judge handing down a fatal sentence. He did not do it because he was confused. He did it to protect a fragile, pathetic, rented illusion of wealth. He tried to hide her from me because Riley is not just the CEO of Vertex Waste Solutions. She is his biological sister. A second massive wave of shock ripped through the ballroom. The scandal was absolute perfection. A fake aristocrat attempting to bury his highly successful blue-collar sister to secure a wealthy marriage. The high society crowd practically salivated at the sheer unadulterated drama of the exposure. Jasmine did not let them recover. She raised her right hand high into the air and snapped her fingers with sharp theatrical precision. The lighting technician working the catwalk above followed the exact instructions Jasmine had provided earlier that afternoon. The massive spotlight sweeping over the crowd instantly changed direction. The blinding white beam of light shot directly across the expansive ballroom, cutting through the darkness like a laser. The spotlight slammed down onto the general admission tables at the far edge of the room. It pinned Connor perfectly to his cheap banquet chair. He was trapped in a circle of blazing, inescapable light. Every single eye in the grand ballroom, hundreds of the most powerful and influential people in the entire city, turned simultaneously to stare directly at him. He sat frozen, his face chalk-white, heavily sweating through the collar of his least velvet tuxedo, completely exposed as the ultimate fraud. Jasmine did not let him look away. She stood at the wooden podium, staring down from the grand stage at the man who had tried to play her brilliant family for fools. She slowly raised her left hand, extending her fingers, so the massive diamond engagement ring caught the harsh glare of the overhead stage lights. The brilliant sparkle of the expensive gemstone stood in sharp contrast to the absolute darkness of the betrayal it represented. When Connor asked me to marry him, Jasmine's voice echoed through the massive ballroom speakers, crisp, clinical, and unwavering. He presented himself as an elite investment banking executive. He told my family he was a man of old money, a master of global finance with a generational trust fund. He wore bespoke suits, ordered expensive wine, and talked a very big game about offshore portfolios and emerging tech sectors. He sold my parents and me a flawless aristocratic illusion. She lowered her hand, her manicured fingers gripping the edge of the podium so tightly her knuckles turned pale. But an illusion is just a polite word for a predatory lie, she stated, the temperature in the room dropping yet again. And my family does not tolerate liars. Jasmine pulled a sleek digital tablet from the podium shelf. She tapped the illuminated screen exactly one time. Immediately, the massive projection screens that flanked the grand stage flickered to life. Instead of displaying the charity gala's philanthropic logo, the screens broadcast a highly detailed, magnified image of a forensic financial report. The bright red numbers were impossible to miss, looming over the entire ballroom like a digital executioner's blade. "Allow me to introduce you to the real Connor," Jasmine announced, gesturing sharply toward the giant screens. "He is not a senior executive. He is a mid-level analyst who barely makes enough money to cover the monthly lease on that flashy sports car he drives. What you are looking at on these screens is a catastrophic trail of absolute financial ruin. My so-called fiancé is currently drowning in exactly $1.2 million of debt. A heavy wave of revulsion swept through the ballroom. The elite guest people who spent their entire lives building and protecting vast corporate fortunes stared at the screens in utter disgust. The wealthy politicians and real estate tycoons began to whisper their voices, carrying a sharp, condemning judgment. You are looking at maxed out high-yield credit cards. Jasmine continued, her voice relentless and completely devoid of mercy. You are looking at predatory personal loans. You are looking at hundreds of thousands of dollars in offshore gambling losses. This man is a walking financial corpse. He targeted me not because he loved me, but because he viewed the real estate dynasty my parents built as his personal bailout fund. He planned to use my family's hard-earned capital to quietly pay off his loan sharks before they broke his legs. Connor looked like he was going to vomit. He gripped the edge of his cheap banquet table, his knuckles turning white as he tried to anchor himself to a reality that was rapidly disintegrating into ash. But Jasmine was not finished. She shifted her fierce, predatory gaze from Connor to the woman sitting rigidly beside him. And a scam of this magnitude requires accomplices, Jasmine declared. Connor did not build this pathetic house of cards alone. He had the full, enthusiastic backing of his parents. Brenda let out a sharp, panicked gasp. She shook her head frantically, holding her hands up in front of her chest, as if she could physically block the words from reaching the elite crowd. Brenda and Richard, Jasmine said, her tone dripping with pure, unadulterated contempt. They sat at my engagement dinner and cried tears of joy. They told me I was an absolute answer to their prayers. I thought they were being deeply sentimental. I did not realize they were quite literally praying for a financial rescue. You see, to fund Connor's fake aristocratic lifestyle, Brenda and Richard completely liquidated their retirement accounts. Even worse, they secretly took out a massive second mortgage on their suburban home. The crowd gasped again. This was the ultimate taboo in high society. It was the desperate, pathetic reality of people sacrificing everything just to pretend they belonged. They funneled every single dime of their remaining equity into Connor's checking account. Jasmine exposed the hard truth, hitting the ballroom like a physical strike. They actively funded a predator. They were willing to sacrifice their own daughter, banning a highly successful corporate CEO from family events just to keep their golden boy looking rich enough to scam my family. They sold their souls for a seat at this table tonight. Jasmine stepped away from the microphone. The heavy silence in the room was absolutely deafening. She walked down the carpeted stairs of the grand stage, moving with the terrifying, unhurried grace of an executioner. The sea of wealthy guests parted immediately, clearing a wide path for her, as she marched directly toward the spotlight, pinning Connor to his table. Connor tried to stand up, but his legs completely failed him. He fell heavily back into his chair, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. Brenda was weeping openly now, her face buried in her hands, her rented silver gown ruined, and her fake aristocratic pride utterly obliterated. Richard stared blankly at the floor, his entire life's pride and financial security completely destroyed. Jasmine stopped right in front of their table. She did not yell. She did not raise her voice. She looked down at Connor with absolute, terrifying authority. She reached for her left hand and grabbed the massive diamond engagement ring. With a swift, sharp pull, she slid the ring off her finger. She threw the heavy piece of jewelry directly onto the center of Connor's table. The diamond hit the cheap porcelain plates with a sharp, resonant clatter that made Brenda violently flinch. "The wedding is off," Jasmine stated, her voice ringing clearly in the quiet, expansive space. "And my legal team has just filed a civil lawsuit against you for attempting to defraud my family." The final blow broke whatever miserable shred of dignity Connor had left. His chair scraped violently against the polished marble floor as he slid out of it. He dropped directly to his knees right there in front of the entire elite society of Chicago. He reached out with trembling, sweaty hands, desperately trying to grab the hem of Jasmine's crimson suit jacket. He was sobbing loudly, begging for forgiveness, pleading with her to listen to him, promising he could explain everything and make it right. Jasmine took a sharp step backward, refusing to let his desperate hands touch her expensive clothing. She looked down at his kneeling, pathetic form with pure, unfiltered disgust. Brenda started wailing. It was a loud, desperate sound of complete social destruction. She realized they were not just broke, they were entirely ruined. No bank would ever look at them. No country club would ever let them through the door. The elite crowd surrounding them did not offer a single ounce of sympathy. The billionaires, mayors, and industry titans stared down at the kneeling man and the wailing mother with absolute, icy contempt. They looked at them exactly like trash that needed to be swiftly swept away. Jasmine turned her back on the pathetic display. She looked across the expansive ballroom, her dark eyes finding the elevated head table where I sat perfectly poised in my emerald gown. She looked directly at me. Riley Jasmine called out, her strong voice carrying easily over the sound of Connor's sobbing and Brenda's wailing. "Please join me on the stage, we have a city to build." I stood up from the elevated platform. The heavy emerald silk of my custom gown swept perfectly across the plush carpet as I descended the velvet-lined stairs. The sea of billionaires, mayors, and industry titans parted for me once again, but this time the atmosphere was completely different. They were no longer just looking at a successful corporate sponsor. They were looking at an executioner walking to the block. I moved with absolute, unhurried precision. Every step I took echoed with the weight of 33 years of being pushed aside, minimized, and treated like an embarrassing secret. I reached the center of the grand stage where Jasmine stood waiting. She stepped back, offering me the center position and the silver microphone with a look of profound sisterly solidarity. I took my place behind the wooden podium. The blinding spotlight shifted, expanding slightly to capture both of us in its brilliant glare. I looked out over the massive ballroom. Hundreds of the most powerful people in Chicago were hanging on my every breath. But my eyes bypassed the elite crowd and locked directly onto the pathetic display happening at the back table. Connor was still on his knees on the cold marble floor. His designer velvet tuxedo was crumpled and soaked with his own desperate sweat. He was gasping for air, absolutely shattered by the reality that his multi-million-dollar scam had collapsed. Brenda was slumped in her cheap banquet chair, her face buried in her hands, her shoulders heaving with loud, ugly sobs. Her entire social climbing existence had been incinerated in less than 10 minutes. Richard stood rigidly beside her, staring blankly at the floor. His retirement was gone. His house was leveraged to the breaking point. He had bet his entire life on a parasitic son and lost absolutely everything. I leaned into the microphone. I did not scream. I did not raise my voice in anger or let a single tear touch my face. I spoke with a chilling, absolute calm that carried flawlessly through the massive ballroom speakers. For my entire life, I began my voice steady and commanding. My parents told me that honest labor was a disease. They banned me from family dinners. They demanded I hide in the shadows because they were terrified my blue-collar industry would shatter their fragile rented illusion of wealth. They looked at a woman who built a corporate empire from the ground up, and they called her a filthy peasant simply because she wore a high-visibility vest. I gripped the edges of the podium, letting the silence stretch for a fraction of a second before delivering the fatal blow. Some people think dealing with trash is shameful, but the real trash is not in the dumpsters. It is the lies, the greed, and parents who would sacrifice one child to fund the delusions of another. A heavy, resonant silence settled over the room. The elite crowd did not whisper or gossip. They absorbed the absolute brutal truth of my words. They looked at my parents not with pity, but with the profound, icy disgust reserved for people who possessed zero moral character. Connor looked up from the floor, his tear-streaked face catching the harsh spotlight. He opened his mouth to beg, to plead for a bailout, to offer some pathetic excuse. I did not give him the chance to speak. I raised my hand and made a sharp, decisive gesture toward the head of security who was standing at the ready near the grand foyer doors. He immediately caught my signal. "Please take the trash out," I ordered, my voice echoing with merciless finality. The security captain nodded sharply. He and his muscular guards marched directly toward the back table. They did not gently escort my family toward the exit. They grabbed Connor by the arms, hauling his limp, sobbing body off the marble floor. They flanked Brenda and Richard, forcing them to stand, and herded them aggressively toward the service doors. Brenda wailed loudly, a desperate, humiliating sound that bounced off the crystal chandeliers. Connor cried out, his voice cracking, as the guards physically dragged him away from the wealthy society he had tried to infiltrate. The heavy wooden service doors swung open, swallowing their pathetic cries, and then slammed shut with a heavy, satisfying thud. The room was finally clean. The tension in the ballroom evaporated instantly. The toxic biohazard had been officially removed from the premises. A spontaneous roaring wave of applause erupted from the crowd. Real estate moguls and tech billionaires stood up from their tables, offering a standing ovation to the woman who had just delivered the most spectacular corporate execution in the history of the City Hope Gala. I turned away from the empty back table and looked at Jasmine. She was smiling, a brilliant, genuine expression of fierce triumph. I reached out and took a crystal flute of premium champagne from a passing waiter. I raised my glass high, turning my attention to the elevated head table where David and Patricia stood, clapping proudly. I locked eyes with the powerful African-American dynasty that had just become my greatest corporate allies. We had exposed the fraud, protected their empire, and secured a multi-million-dollar infrastructure deal that would change the city forever. I took a slow, victorious sip of the champagne. The sweet, crisp taste of absolute success flooded my senses. I had walked into this ballroom as the discarded daughter. I was walking out as an untouchable queen. I turned back toward the cheering crowd, standing shoulder to shoulder with Jasmine, and stepped brilliantly into the blinding light of my limitless future. The most profound lesson from Riley's journey is that your self-worth is never defined by those blinded by superficiality. Toxic families may try to diminish your honest hard work to protect their own fragile illusions of status, projecting their insecurities onto you. However, true power doesn't come from rented luxury or desperate social climbing. It is built on grit, authenticity, and standing firmly in your truth. When you stop seeking validation from people committed to misunderstanding you, you reclaim your ultimate power. You never need a seat at their table when you have the strength to build your own empire. Have you ever had to walk away from toxic expectations to build your own success? Share your story in the comments below.